Our story begins at the moment when a beautiful girl named Grace runs at full speed down the corridor of Olin Mansion. She doesn't notice anyone around. Right now, the most important thing for her is to make it in time. The servants are in shock. It's the first time they've seen Lady Olin run like this. What's more, they couldn't understand where the young mistress was heading in just a nightgown, and so determinedly at that. And at that moment, Grace was only thinking that she urgently needed to tell her father the important news before he left. A smile lit up the girl's face as soon as she realized that her father's office was right around the corner. But just the simple address of a familiar voice to her makes Lady Olin stop abruptly. She raises an indecisive gaze upwards, not understanding what is wrong with the voice of this person opposite her. Right in front of her stands the dark-haired Duke Lucas Black, staring intently. He hesitantly asks Lady Olin if something has happened. Lucas's face immediately turns red as soon as he remembers the bet. If the Duke visits the Olin estate and the beautiful lady runs to meet him, it will mean that she is certainly in love with him. Does this girl really love him? Not so long ago, at a banquet among aristocrats, respected sirs were animatedly discussing the news that today, Duke Lucas Black would attend this event. Although they didn't see much of a difference because at parties he always hides so well that you can't even see him, one of the aristocrats suggested that the gentleman was going to see his fiancée, but then suddenly heard a voice behind him. Suspecting nothing, he calmly turned around to look at the person. The aristocrats were shocked. Standing right in front of them was Duke Lucas Black himself, his face clearly showing indignation. They hastily retreated so as not to block his way. Lucas couldn't understand why these people were running away if they were going to gossip anyway. Apparently, everyone was curious to know if the Grand Duke had really come for his fiancée. However, our hero was quite tired of it. Ever since he inherited the title of Duke and became the head of House Black, this topic had given everyone no peace. One day, his assistant informed him that all family members believed the master should get married this year. Lucas's family also insisted on marriage, as it was the duty of the head of the house who inherited the family secret. And the Duke came to this party solely because of that cursed duty. Of course, Lucas wasn't against marriage, it's just that one desire was stuck in his head. He was afraid to admit it, but in reality, the man didn't want a marriage without love. Lucas knew that the word love had many meanings, and it includes the concepts of courage, trust, support, and joy. What a beautiful and profound word, no worse than the words devotion and justice. To start this meaningless circus without love, the young, rich, and handsome Duke considered beneath his dignity. Therefore, despite pressure from his loved ones, Lucas decided to wait for the one who could capture his heart once and for all. But lately, the man had begun to think that this was just an impossible dream. And so, once again at the banquet, some aristocrat approached him to introduce his daughter, whose name, apparently, was Grace. Lady Olin dryly greeted the Grand Duke, and then she emotionlessly stated her name, looking confidently at the gentleman. For a few moments, the man was speechless at the unearthly beauty of this incredible girl. Perhaps her lilac eyes were to blame for everything, or perhaps her voice, repeating incessantly in his head, caused such a reaction in our hero. The man didn't know the answer, but suddenly his aversion to political marriage quickly subsided, and he introduced himself to the lady in return. For some reason, Lucas didn't mind meeting her again. But as soon as it happened, for a whole half hour, our heroes just sat silently opposite each other and drank tea. The Duke realized that at this rate, the cup in the girl's hand would surely crack. Lady Olin is trembling before him like a chick. Is this beautiful girl really so afraid of strangers? And if so, the Duke decided to ask something to dispel the awkwardness. And of course, Lucas saw nothing better than to ask a direct question, whether Grace was uncomfortable with him. However, the man's question caused a completely opposite reaction in the lady. The girl started trembling even more, and the Duke felt even more awkward. This was not at all what he wanted to say. Now he could definitely say goodbye to making a good first impression. Lucas felt shame and sadness because he had so many questions he wanted to ask this beautiful girl. To be honest, Grace Olin appealed to him for many reasons. She is one of the few women who was granted a noble title directly by the king. And despite being the noble daughter of a marquise, Grace ran a school for children from lower classes. She is also knowledgeable in botany and invented a preservative that helps the poor avoid starvation during droughts. Of course, not everyone treated her well. Some high society snobs criticized her for lacking the manners every noble girl should possess. However, every time he saw Lady Allin, Duke Black thought otherwise. He saw in her a strong soul, capable of doing what others could not. Perhaps such a strong spirit could share a secret with him. A suddenly dropped teacup interrupted the Duke's thoughts. The characteristic sound of broken crockery made him flinch sharply and turn his attention to the shattered cup. Feeling even more awkward, Lucas barely extended his hand and, bewildered, asked Lady Grace if she was all right. The girl exclaimed in fright that it was all her fault. Seeing her fear, the Duke paused for a moment, and then, in a softer tone, replied that there was nothing to worry about. Although he liked the lady, Lucas decided to cross her off the list, as it's hard to marry someone who looks like she's about to die at every meeting. The Duke noticed that the lady was very ashamed, so he decided he had to help. He handed Grace a snow-white handkerchief and asked her to take it, but the fear in the girl's eyes became even more pronounced, which caused the man even greater bewilderment. Since that was the case, Lucas decided to try again, but more gently. So he smiled and asked her to take the handkerchief, but the smile turned out to be terrifying in the lady's eyes. The Duke did not expect what would happen in the next second. The beautiful Lady Olin fainted from fear and collapsed right in front of him, which made Lucas think he had killed her. The man lifted the girl, completely ceasing to understand what was happening. All he did was offer the lady his handkerchief to wipe herself, but for some reason she fainted. But the main thing is that the young girl is breathing, which means she is still alive. Duke Black was taken aback as Grace's lips barely moved and she uttered something almost inaudibly. And as soon as it happened again, the man realized that she had just called him by name. Lucas hugged the lady even tighter and wondered why she had said that. For some inexplicable reason, he found it difficult to take his eyes off Grace. This had never happened to him before. The whole situation seemed very strange to our hero. Soon, Grace came to her senses and slowly opened her eyes. For some reason, she found herself in the arms of the family knight, Sir Cassius, although just recently she had been drinking tea with Grand Duke Black. Suddenly, nearby, she heard a familiar male voice, which turned out to be the aforementioned man. Our heroine wondered what the Duke was talking about with her maid Julia right now. Now Grace remembered that she had wanted to say something to this man, but hadn't had the chance, because she had fainted from fear of him. Feeling a gaze upon him, Grand Duke Black turned and looked at the young girl. Lady Oline's eyes widened and her heart began to beat faster. Then the girl noticed Lucas heading straight for her. As he approached, the man extended his hand and coldly asked Lady Oline if she was all right. A shiver ran down the young girl's spine, and then she began to tremble with fear again. Inside, she even screamed in wild terror at this man, and then she lost consciousness again, thereby causing concern for her servants. In fact, Grace was not afraid of Lucas Black at first. 3 years ago, when the girl debuted in high society, she could not resist her father's requests, so she attended the royal reception. From the very beginning, Grace began to feel tired and wanted to return home as soon as possible. Since her debut, her father had become obsessed with the idea of marrying the girl off. Among the families father had his eye on, the main one was the Black family, also known as the family of the raging Black Stallion. Even Grace herself, unfamiliar with the affairs of high society, had heard of them. Currently, the eldest son Lucas and the second son Cain are responsible for all interactions with high society, and, to the delight of many, both are unmarried, so it wasn't just our heroine's father who started looking at potential suitors. Given that Lucas Black is the Crown Prince's right-hand man, it's no surprise that he attracts the most attention. It seems her father sent Grace here because of rumors that Lucas Black would be arriving, so the girl started looking around. Suddenly, the ladies standing nearby began to whisper excitedly. Turning her head, Lady Olin froze when she saw the guest. A handsome, dark-haired man walked confidently into the room. With the arrival of this one person, the atmosphere in the hall completely changed. Grace even began to feel as if she was looking at the most beautiful statue in the world, unable to tear her eyes away. So she became curious to know who this man was, if he was some foreign prince who had arrived from afar. One of the girls nearby suggested that Lady Elendia was very happy, and that perhaps she would soon marry the Grand Duke Black. Grace was taken aback, realizing that this was the very Lucas Black. But most importantly, he was getting married soon. Lady Elendia Rosenheim merely smiled and replied that the engagement was just old people gossiping for now. She generally thought that rumors of friendship between their families stemmed more from the fact that her older brother was friends with Lucas. Grace realized that Lucas was already discussing marriage with Lady Elendia, meaning her father had been wrong all this time, saying that the Duke had no one. If the girl hadn't found out about this earlier, she would have approached the one who was soon to be married. Such a scene was even scary to imagine. Grace was glad she found out about everything in time. She decided to go outside for some fresh air, and immediately felt relieved that she hadn't made a terrible mistake. In the end, Grace simply ran away, but now she needs to figure out how to explain it to her father. In reality, our heroine doesn't really want to get married that much. She perfectly understands that marriages among the nobility are merely a way to strengthen family ties, which is why Grace didn't want such a thing. However, if the girl says this, she will be the one in the wrong in the eyes of her father and society. However, this has been happening to her entire conscious life. Deciding to return home, the young girl headed towards the carriage, but suddenly heard a strange rustling among the trees. At first, Grace thought it was just the wind, until she heard a human scream. Only then did she notice the silhouettes of two people. One of the men called the other a Rontian rat, saying it was very bold to hide right in the palace next to the king. Animalistic horror was visible in the blonde's eyes. He was trembling with fear of imminent reprisal, and tears streamed from his eyes. Grace hid behind a tree, watching the scene unfold with horror. Suddenly, the first man asked if the hero was crying over his severed fingers, even though he himself had decided to betray the kingdom. It was then that Lady Allen realized that these words were spoken by Duke Black, whose face was beaming with a mad, bloodthirsty smile. The young lady felt an animal fear that completely engulfed her. She hid behind the wide tree trunk, pressing her hands to her mouth so as not to make any sound and reveal herself. God forbid. Grace perfectly understood that she needed to run. However, that day was the first time the girl fainted upon seeing Lucas Black. Since childhood, this heroine has suffered from ichnophobia, which occurs when using or seeing sharp or pointed objects. On the day Grace fainted, she was fortunately found by a passing royal guard who sent her home. But from that day on, the girl's phobia intensified so much that it became difficult for her to even look at cutlery. It took a long time to recover and return to high society, which made her father very angry. However, over time, Grace got better. She very much hoped that now she wouldn't have to meet Grand Duke Black anymore. That's what the heroine thought, but everything turned out completely differently. From that day on, Grace couldn't hold a fork for a year, and now they were going to be matched. But wasn't the Duke going to marry someone else? Rumor had it that Lucas Black had abandoned his sword and was now in business. If so, then maybe meeting him wouldn't be so scary. However, remembering Duke Black's chilling gaze, Grace realized that she was still afraid of that man. She suddenly jumped up and screamed loudly across the room. "How can I marry someone so terrifying?" She needed to talk to her father urgently, and if possible, she could dissuade him from this absurd marriage. But that day, she encountered Duke Black again. A week after the heroine fainted, they met again, but this time right at her house in front of her father's study. Lucas immediately asked the miss how she was feeling. Memories of that day abruptly cut off in Grace's head, making her feel out of sorts. The lady bowed and thanked the gentleman for everything he had done then, to which Lucas briefly replied that it was his duty as a man. Grace gave the Duke a distrustful look. It seems he's in a good mood today, even if his face is still stone. Something good must have happened to Lucas. The man explained that Marquis Allen said something needed to be discussed urgently, so he decided to stop by briefly and check on her at the same time. For some reason, our heroine began to feel that the Duke was now ashamed, and only then did the girl realize why the man reacted to her that way. She is still dressed in her nightgown. Grace mentally asked all the gods of the world why they couldn't meet the Duke normally, just once. The girl immediately bowed, apologizing to the Duke, and was about to leave when he suddenly stopped her. As it turned out, Lucas had prepared something for the miss. The young woman's eyes widened as soon as she noticed the sword with the Duke, the very one she had seen that evening. Grace's body began to tremble. She caught herself thinking that she was starting to panic again. Suddenly, Lucas handed the lady a small pouch tied with a yellow ribbon. He explained that it was a tea that helps with anxiety and tension. Lucas just felt uneasy about how the girl was trembling. Grace accepted the gift and thanked the Duke, promising that she would definitely enjoy drinking his tea. She was already intending to return to her room when she suddenly stumbled. There was nothing to grab onto, so the girl began to fall. Fortunately, Duke Black reacted in time and reached out to the young woman to prevent her from falling. The fall did happen, and to her horror, Grace found herself in the man's arms, lying on top of him. Lucas raised his head and, bewildered, asked the young miss if she was all right. Grace looked at the Duke in fright and immediately apologized, saying she would get up right away. At that very moment, the door opened and Marquis Olin came out into the corridor, asking discontentedly what all the noise was about. And then the man saw the scene. Duke Black was lying on the floor, and Grace, dressed only in a nightgown, was looming over him. Her father's chilling tone made the girl freeze. He coldly asked his daughter what she was doing there, and then ordered her to come to his study immediately. The door slammed shut. The Marquis began to scold Grace for her inappropriate behavior and appearance, but she tried to explain that it was a misunderstanding. She just wanted to deliver urgent news and stumbled. There was really nothing between her and Duke Black. However, her father wouldn't listen to his daughter, sharply saying that these were all foolish excuses. Grace needed to know her place and stop contradicting a man. Her father ordered her to stay in her room and not come out, but the girl disobeyed. As usual, the Marquis isn't listening to her at all. Our heroine is quite tired of this. How much longer will she have to endure it? It's been known for a long time that a girl's words mean nothing here. She should have gotten used to it by now, but for some reason, Grace felt sad. At that moment, the Marquis was only thinking that these girls were nothing but trouble. They constantly needed to be put in their place. Grace flinched as soon as her father asked if she had decided to attract the Grand Duke attention with her youth. She immediately exclaimed that it wasn't like that at all, but this only angered the Marquis, as his daughter had interrupted him mid-sentence. At that very moment, Lucas entered the study and, in a cold tone, informed the Marquis that it was impolite of him to keep guests waiting. Grace sharply turned around and looked at the Duke in surprise. If the Marquis decided to punish the lady for what had happened earlier, then Lucas was obliged to intervene. He apologized for causing the misunderstanding, but assured them that what happened was indeed an accident. It was strange. The Duke so ardently defended the Marquis's daughter, which made her father begin to think that Grace might like him. A cunning smile appeared on the man's lips, and he announced that now the Duke must take responsibility for what happened. If Grace was in a man's arms in just a nightgown, it meant she had lost her innocence, and she wasn't even married yet. To which the Duke coldly replied that he would simply pretend he hadn't heard the Marquis's words. Grace's father began to show his indignation. Is the Duke really just going to leave after shaming his unmarried daughter? Lucas's brows furrowed and he replied to the Marquis, quote 1, "Only the head of the Olin family lacks honor here." The Grand Duke had nothing more to add. He turned around and announced his departure. As soon as the door slammed shut, the Marquis called Lucas a scoundrel who was putting on airs. The situation couldn't have been worse. Our heroine began to panic. What would happen to the engagement if the Duke simply left now? And what was the man so angry about anyway? Grace tried to calm herself with the thought that she hadn't done anything. However, moments immediately flashed through her mind. How she dramatically fainted, screamed right in his face, and attacked from an ambush. All this suggests that the girl has done a lot in this short time. In that case, the entire Allen family could simply be executed, so Grace decided to act. She couldn't let it happen. Before leaving the office, she asked her father for a minute and then promised to return. During this time, Duke Black had already reached his carriage. He had to stop abruptly as soon as he heard a woman's voice behind him, asking him to wait a minute. Grace started to get out of breath from running, and trying to catch it, she asked the Duke to talk. Apparently, the girl wants to say something very important, Lucas thought, since she ran so hard that she was completely exhausted. He confusedly asked her to catch her breath first. Grace's face at that moment was certainly something to behold. It wasn't even a 10-minute walk here, but she managed to run it in a couple. Lucas came closer and said he would wait, but the girl immediately flinched, replying that she was already feeling better. The next moment, she bowed and offered her apologies. The Duke calmly replied that Lady Allen had absolutely nothing to apologize to him for, so he wasn't going to take such words from her. However, even if what happened was an accident, it's unacceptable if rumors spread. Even the Black household could become a target of ridicule. The Duke took a risk and stood up for the heroine, so she couldn't just forget about it. With her hand on her heart, Grace confidently declared that it was all her fault. So, she apologizes again and promises to take full responsibility. Lucas froze. He hadn't expected such a reaction from this girl at all. Suddenly, Grace caught herself thinking that it sounded too harsh when she just wanted the servants not to gossip. Just as the girl thought, Grand Duke Black would not accept her apology. Her family would soon be gone, but the young girl was most worried about the school. She was afraid to imagine what might happen to the poor little ones after all this. After all, it was they who brought Grace joy and gave meaning to her life. Our heroine was definitely against such an end. Even if the Olin family came to an end, Grace comforted herself with the thought that she had a separate title and some savings. In the East, they say that even in a tiger's den, you can survive if you don't panic. So now Grace needs to pull herself together. She was about to tell the Duke everything, but the man suddenly interrupted her. Lucas abruptly threw a cloak over the lady as he began to worry that the girl might catch a cold. The young girl hastily promised that no one would find out about today's incident. And then, in a trembling voice, she timidly thanked His Grace for the cloak. She made another promise that she would definitely ask the servants to return the item to the Duke, to which Lucas replied that it was unnecessary. This girl was clearly very strange. First, she trembles like an aspen leaf in front of him, and then she appears before the Duke all brave and courageous. And during the conversation, Grace's facial expression kept changing, which made one want to observe the lady even more. In the end, the young lady smiled sweetly and thanked His Grace for the cloak. The man once again mentally reminded himself that this strange lady was simply shy. He decided to ask Miss Allen to do him a favor, and Grace enthusiastically volunteered to do it. However, she didn't expect the Grand Duke to ask her to personally return this cloak. In Lucas's opinion, the best time to do this would be next week, but Grace disagreed, though she didn't say so aloud. Glancing at his pocket watch, the Duke announced that he would soon send Miss an invitation. Lucas stared at her, so Grace couldn't look back at him and only timidly mumbled something to herself. In the end, she was forced to thank him for his generosity, but deep down she realized that now she was truly doomed. Finally, Lucas announced that he would prepare a carriage for the miss, so she could come without worrying about anything. Before getting into the carriage, the Duke stopped and thereby attracted the young girl's attention. And then he smiled menacingly and wished for a speedy meeting with Miss. Grace froze, finally convinced that this was definitely the end for her. As soon as the carriage left, a maid approached the young mistress and timidly informed her that the master was already waiting for her. The next day in the Black Empire, Assistant Hyam enthusiastically exclaimed that this was exactly what he was talking about. Lucas tore his gaze from the papers and looked skeptically at the hero, not understanding what he meant. As it turned out, Hyam was completely convinced that Lady Allen was head over heels in love with their Duke. As his first argument, he cited the young girl's trembling voice when speaking with His Grace, and Lucas did not deny it. And the second argument was that the lady couldn't look the gentleman in the eye and was constantly blushing. In other words, all of this is called by one word: love. The assistant was immensely pleased, as their eternally single Duke had finally found a partner. However, Lucas perfectly understood that even if Miss Allen felt something for him, she would sharply distance herself after learning his secret. Therefore, the Duke asked Chaim to stop spouting nonsense, as it was rude in the first place. The assistant apologized to Lucas and asked what he was currently doing. He was taken aback when he learned that the Duke was personally preparing invitations and a gift for Miss Allen. Chaim exclaimed in astonishment, "They're as rare as hen's teeth. They are sold in only one place, and in small batches. Even noble ladies cannot all afford them." The assistant froze as soon as the Duke said that he had stood in line for this. This made the guy laugh, to think that the great Duke stood in line with noble ladies to buy it. As Chaim thought, His Grace has an eye for such things. He could guarantee that the Marquis's daughter would really like something like that. Upon hearing this, Lucas's lips spontaneously curved upwards. Therefore, our heroine soon received a small box and, unsuspecting, immediately opened it. This happened the next day at Marquis Oline's estate. The young girl, of course, expected a gift, but not an orange Bardot. Inside was an orange Bardot greenhouse, also known as a ticket to the greenhouse. In other words, it was a relaxing oil. Its scent is light and refreshing, harmoniously combining flowers and herbs. And when applied to the body, the oil quickly relieves fatigue and soothes the soul. The greenhouse is incredibly expensive, and even if you stand in line all night, it's not guaranteed you'll get it. It's a coveted gift. Grace misunderstood everything and took it as a warning that if she didn't bring a gift of the same caliber, she wouldn't be forgiven. But what to do? The heroine doesn't have that much money right now, and asking her father isn't an option as he'll just start yelling again. A memory surfaced in Grace's mind of how the Grand Duke thoughtfully draped his cloak over her so she wouldn't get cold. For a moment, it even seemed to her that he wasn't a bad person. However, that memory completely changed her perception of him. The Grand Duke, covered in blood, stands before his opponent, looking at him with his empty, cold eyes and smiling. Grace made a decision. She needs to tell him everything as it is. She cannot marry someone so terrifying. At that very moment, the maid Julia unexpectedly appeared nearby, asking who the lady was talking about. Our heroine sharply jumped aside and silently screamed. Julia is Grace's personal maid. She is smart and confident, quick-witted, and the girls are also the same age. Not only Julia, but also the other servants in the estate are kind to our heroine. At an early age, Grace lost her mother. Despite the circumstances, her father didn't shed a single tear at the funeral, unlike everyone else. Instead, the grief of loss was shared with our heroine by Elia, the head maid. After that, her father became strict and indifferent, and her stepbrother constantly tormented Grace and ruined her toys. But the caring maids mended the toys and returned them to the lady. Whenever Grace felt bad, it was always the servants who comforted her. Suddenly, Julia noticed that very infamous cloak of Duke Black, which he dared to ask to be returned personally. The lady's face immediately turned red, and the maid promised that she would not tell anyone about it. But Julia immediately reassured her mistress. They were alone here, and she wasn't gossiping, and all the chatterboxes had long since been dealt with. But if anyone appeared, through the left, the maid was ready to convince, and through the right, to seal everything. The main character asked to avoid violence and inquired what had actually happened. As it turned out, Julia came to her mistress because dinner was almost ready, so they couldn't delay any longer, as pork steak was being served today. Having said that, Julia began to push Grace towards the exit. Soon, the entire Allen family gathered at the dinner table. The first thing the Marquis did was ask his daughter since when she had been so close to Lucas Black. He didn't think they were already in such a relationship. Hearing this, Norman's face immediately contorted. He abruptly jumped up and emotionally asked what his father was even talking about. The Marquis calmly replied that their daughter was a disgrace. She ran up to the Duke in her underwear and pounced on him like a greedy beast. Her brother replied that Grace would never do such a thing, and this answer surprised the head of the family. For once, Norman was defending his sister. However, it was not like that at all. The guys simply couldn't believe that anyone could fall in love with such a boring, stubborn girl. But who knows? Maybe the Duke prefers exactly this type. By their aura of sadness and despondency, they are definitely a good match. It couldn't be otherwise. Father and brother openly mocked the defenseless girl, feeling their superiority. Tired of enduring it, Grace replied that she wasn't in her underwear at the time, and everything that happened was just a misunderstanding. The Marquis slammed his fist on the table and exclaimed, raising his voice, that he didn't need excuses. He was already ashamed of those memories. However, if the relationship is truly romantic, that's another matter. It's natural for men and women to be drawn to each other. Besides, the Duke's family is wealthy, and they have plenty of land. That's why Grace should understand what her father is hinting at. Back in her room, our heroine began to feel unwell, assuming she had indigestion. Julia started to worry as the lady hadn't really eaten, but Grace just smiled and asked the maid to bring her something to drink. The girl exclaimed that she would fulfill the lady's request immediately. The door slammed shut, and now our heroine was left alone in the room. The happiness was short-lived, because Lady Allen heard footsteps outside the door and even began to think that Julia had returned. However, it turned out to be quite different. It was Norman, who didn't stand on ceremony and kicked the door open. A soul-chilling fear ran through the heroine's body as soon as her brother asked if she was already hanging out with men. Grace sharply jumped up and asked her brother what he was doing there, but he only replied that he had to restrain himself at dinner. But now he can teach his disobedient little sister a lesson, because she should know her place. Our heroine's father, Catherine Allen, knew absolutely nothing about love. Even after the Marquise's death, when the girl was bedridden with a severe fever, he only looked at her distantly and coldly, calling her as weak as her mother. Her stepbrother, named Norman, hated Grace no less. He constantly mocked the girl and shouted, "How dare the daughter of the second wife try to become equal to him, the first son?" However, Grace began to study, hoping that if she tried, something would change. She believed that if she achieved something, their opinion would change. The heroine even studied dead languages, and fortunately, accounting suited her perfectly. The more Grace studied these languages, the more interesting and useful they seemed. The girl graduated with honors from the academy, which she entered after countless attempts to persuade her father. Despite the ability to help those in need with her acquired knowledge, the more Grace used it, the more she was hated. Norman's violence, stemming from his inferiority complex, grew stronger every day, eventually turning physical. The girl opened the box, from which Norman's voice emerged, telling his sister it was time she knew her place. And then came the characteristic sound of a slap to the face. Grace couldn't take it anymore, so she ordered a recording stone through Julia. Fortunately, Norman is a hot-headed, narrow-minded imbecile who never suspected a thing. Thanks to this, the girl could discreetly record him. This time the recording turned out well, and someday these recordings will help. The door opened again, but this time Julia appeared in the doorway with a tray in her hands. She informed her mistress that she had brought her something to drink and some medicine, but then immediately fell silent, horrified by what she saw. Grace's room was turned upside down. Everything was in disarray. The maid immediately ran up to the lady and began to protest as soon as she saw the huge bruise on her face. She immediately realized that this scoundrel had come to her mistress's room again. Grace sat down on the sofa, assuring Julia that she was fine and there was no need to worry. The maid began to tidy up the room, all the while expressing her dissatisfaction with Mr. Norman's behavior. She asked Grace to wait a little while she brought medicine and water. When Julia returned and began to anoint the mistress's cheek, Grace apologized that the maid had to do such a thing. Julia replied that everything was fine and asked what they would do, because with such a cheek, it would be impossible to go out for some time. And only now did Grace remember that she still hadn't prepared a gift, and she would soon have to go to Black Manor. The lady began to panic because she was going to visit the shopping district tomorrow. Hearing this, Julia resolutely declared that her mistress could rely on her. The next day, the girls arrived in the city. The maid asked Grace to wait a bit while she bought some flowers. Our heroine, with glasses on her eyes and a huge hat on her head, gave a strange smile and waved to Julia. They understood perfectly well that even if they covered up the bruise, the swelling couldn't be hidden. If you looked closely, it would still be visible. That's why Julia then suggested a way to hide it all. At that moment, Grace had no idea what the maid was talking about. The plan actually worked. People stopped looking at her cheek, but instead, they now couldn't take their eyes off the hat. Only then did Grace realize that a snow-white dove was sitting on her headdress, having gotten there somehow. Be that as it may, it doesn't compare to the price of the Bardo greenhouse. But the girl hoped that cufflinks were still considered a good gift. The saleswoman smiled when she heard the sound of the door opening and greeted the valued customer. She immediately apologized and asked to wait a bit while she served the man. Grace took off her hat and glasses and asked the madam not to rush. However, she suddenly froze as soon as she heard a familiar voice that called out to her in surprise. Opposite her stood Lucas Black, who was curious to know what brought Lady Allen here. Our heroine hastily put on her hat and mentally exclaimed why she had run into the Duke right now. Putting on her glasses, the heroine turned around and, making her voice rougher, asked the man who he was. This shocked Lucas, and the shop owner smiled sweetly. She had never seen a hat tied in such a way. Grace exclaimed that she was being mistaken for someone else and hastily left the shop. The Duke didn't even have time to say a word. The girl couldn't even imagine such a terrible situation. She had run into Duke Black right now. Suddenly, behind her, Grace heard Lucas's voice, who apparently had chased right after her, and she started to panic even more. She decided to run into the first shop she saw, but everything turned out in a completely unbelievable way. Inside was a muscular man in just an apron, who winked at the lady and asked how he could help. Taking a step back, the girl immediately apologized to the blacksmith, saying that she had simply mistaken the door. However, suddenly, as if by irony of fate, a sharp sword fell from the wall to the floor. Seeing the weapon, the main character felt an animal fear and clutched her head, feeling panic rising. At that very moment, her fragile shoulders were embraced by the strong arms of the Duke, who had finally caught up with the girl. Seeing that something was wrong with Grace, Lucas started shouting, trying to bring her back to her senses. The Duke couldn't understand what was going on here. The young girl's pupils were dilated, her breathing was ragged, and cold sweat beaded on her face. Lucas immediately turned his attention to the blacksmith and indignantly asked what had happened here. As it turned out, a decorative sword was hanging at the entrance, and then it fell, after which the young lady had such a reaction. A small tremor began to shake Grace, and she quietly whispered that she needed to get out of there immediately. The Duke gently took Grace's hand and apologized for his rudeness, and then he wrapped his arms around her small body and pulled her close. He began to calm the girl with words that she just needed to breathe slowly to relax. The most important thing is not to be afraid, because everything is fine and he is here. Grace heard the sound of a heartbeat and a warm voice. It turned out to be pleasant, as if a huge plush toy was hugging her. As soon as the heroine came to her senses, she didn't immediately understand what the Duke was doing here. The man, feeling awkward, said that he was very glad that Lady Allen had finally woken up. And then he asked to be released, and only then did Grace realize that she had been hugging him tightly all this time. The young girl's cheeks flushed as soon as she realized what was happening. She sharply pulled away from the man. The Duke immediately apologized for grabbing the lady without permission. He just thought the girl needed to be calmed down. Grace was surprised that he stood there until she calmed down and immediately thanked the man. However, all this time, passers-by from the street were carefully watching them. Our heroine flinched as soon as she realized that a huge number of people had witnessed this scene. Duke Black himself noticed this. Grace perfectly understood that if what happened became known, everyone would start blaming her. So now something had to be done. She could distract them, but the young girl couldn't think of how. At that very moment, Lucas leaned towards Lady Allen and told her that he had a good idea. A smile appeared on his lips, and he asked the girl to simply trust him. As a result, our heroine found herself inside the Duke's carriage, sitting opposite the man with her head bowed. The girl just sits and trembles silently. So this made Lucas wonder if it was because of what happened in the store. It turns out a decorative sword fell, and when she saw it, she started to panic, although there's nothing special about this sword. Lucas's eyes widened in surprise when he suddenly heard a woman's laughter. The main character admitted that she simply couldn't forget the Duke's expression at that moment. A couple of hours ago, they had left the blacksmith's, and on the way out, Lucas put on a dramatic act, saying something about his chronic anemia. The man assured her that if it weren't for Lady Allen, he would have died there. This general-like man, who had been through hundreds of battles, seemed to genuinely think this trick would work. It was obvious that people wouldn't believe it. At that very moment, Lucas said that he really hoped no one would say anything about it. Shedding a single tear, the Duke added that he would be so ashamed if everyone found out about it. An awkward silence hung in the air. As a result, people didn't want to look at this disgusting spectacle and simply turned around and left. Emerging from her memories, Grace admitted that she never would have thought she'd see such a side of the Duke. Lucas regretted nothing. He was glad the lady enjoyed it. Our heroine was very surprised when the Duke suddenly inquired about her well-being at that moment. He wasn't trying to pry. It's just that if the lady was trying to put on a brave face for him, she'd better stop. If the girl wanted, they could stop by the doctor's or a tea house for a cup of hot tea. If Grace wanted to relax right now, looking at the green plain, they could even go there. The Duke simply didn't want the lady to think she was alone. Looking into the man's eyes, our heroine realized that he was genuinely worried. She thanked His Grace for his kindness and assured him that she was indeed much better. Lucas smiled, perfectly understanding that it would be impolite to insist further, so he should stop. So he resolutely asked the lady to allow him to take her home. Soon our heroes arrived at their destination. Duke Black was already intending to leave, but Grace politely asked him to stop. She bowed and thanked the man for today. Grace completely forgot herself and accidentally returned with him, but since she saw that side of him, now is the time to say something. This is her last chance to call off the engagement. Grace understood perfectly well that if the Duke found out about her acmephobia, he would surely be disappointed and call off the engagement. So now was the right moment, but for some reason, the heroine couldn't say it. The lady continued to remain silent, so Lucas began to feel the tense atmosphere between them. Suddenly, the man's eyes widened as soon as he understood everything. Now Lady Allen would timidly look at him and confess that she actually liked Duke Black very much. Lucas's heart began to beat faster with excitement. Grace confessed that she couldn't tell the Duke about it, but she can't hide it anymore, and she doesn't see the point in doing so. However, the man suddenly interrupted Miss, saying that this was not the place for such conversations, apparently understanding what the heroine wanted to say. Lucas stepped closer and leaned towards Grace. Lucas's low, velvety voice sounded right next to the girl's ear as soon as the man apologized for interrupting. However, they are on a crowded street, so they'd better avoid rumors. For today, it's better to part ways and discuss everything next time, when Miss Grace comes to him. A smile appeared on Lucas's lips as soon as the girl agreed with his decision. He said in parting that he would eagerly await their next meeting, and then got into the carriage and left. Surprised, Julia delightedly exclaimed that the Duke was like a whirlwind. She was sure that the young lady must be tired, so she suggested they go back quickly. Grace agreed, but in her mind, the question of what exactly the Duke was waiting for still lingered. Soon, that very day arrived. Our heroine, along with her personal maid, arrived at the Duchy of Black, where she was immediately greeted by the servants. The Duke's assistant, named Chaim, was the first to meet her. Following him, the head butler of the Duchy of Black, named Gabriel, bowed his head. Our heroine smiled politely and told the men that she was very pleased to meet them. She was very pleased that they came out to meet her. Many here had heard of Milady, so it was a great honor to host her. There was still time before dinner, so she was led to the guest room. Julia looked closely at Chaim. His kind face immediately showed that he was the complete opposite of the Duke. The Duke's assistant informed the girls that Gabriel would escort them, and Julia understood that he definitely wouldn't scare Grace. The head butler led the girls to the correct room and informed them that he would escort them to the dining room when it was time. The room inside was very different from the roomers. Lady Allen's personal maid thought it would be completely dark and dreadful here. Grace opened the window and immediately a beautiful view of the duchy's garden opened up before her. Before their arrival, the young mistress had been very tense, so now Julia was glad that she was feeling better. The maid decided to ask for tea and other drinks, so she informed Lady Grace that she would take a walk and be back soon. Soon, the duchy's maids began to praise Julia for knowing all the useful teas at her age. The girl was pleased to know that she was recognized by the culinary veterans. Remembering a curious fact, Julia asked why there were so few servants in such a huge estate. As it turned out, His Grace simply doesn't like noise and crowds, so there aren't many servants. Of course, this means they have a lot of work, but the Duke pays accordingly, and he doesn't skimp on their rest either. The Duke was a good man. The maids were happy to work for him and were sure that Miss Julia understood their feelings. The girl thoughtfully answered yes, saying that she understood it very well. As soon as she brought hot drinks to her mistress, Grace asked the girl how her walk was. Julia sincerely replied that she really liked it here. The people around were very kind and helpful. They even made amazing tea. This aroma, perfectly steeped in warm water tea leaves, relaxed our heroine very well. Grace even wondered when was the last time she felt so good. There was a knock at the door, and as soon as the maid Julia opened it, she immediately saw a huge bouquet of flowers. The man who entered immediately apologized. He wanted to present these flowers to Lady Grace. The main character stood up abruptly, staring at the man in bewilderment. Dressed up, Lucas smiled and announced that dinner preparations were complete, and he had come to escort the ladies. His unearthly beauty dazzled both girls. The Duke apologized for not being able to meet the guest personally, and then offered the bouquet to its true owner. This was clearly too much, but Lucas offered the girl his arm and suggested they go. Grace took his hand and together they went to the dining room. At least that's what Grace thought. But Lucas unexpectedly announced that since they had a special guest today, they would be dining outside. And when they arrived at the location, our heroine was speechless. She couldn't understand how to react, whether to admire or laugh, and what Duke Black was up to anyway. But as soon as Lucas looked at her with eyes full of hope, the girl realized that she still needed to be admired. Grace said that it was wonderful, and the Duke was glad to hear it, as it had been difficult to prepare everything. For some reason, this man now seems completely different from how our heroine had seen him before. So this is what he's really like. Grace even, unexpectedly for herself, wondered if he truly liked her. The lady would never have thought they would be dining under the moon. What was happening around them was simply beautiful. Lucas was glad that his lady liked it. He had prepared all of this exclusively in honor of her arrival. What he said greatly surprised the girl, and she shyly thanked his grace. Unexpectedly, Lady Allen announced that she had prepared something for the Duke, which greatly interested him. Taking out a small box, the heroine showed cufflinks and a handkerchief that she had brought as a token of gratitude for the invitation. Apparently, the Duke really liked this gift, and he even asked for permission to try them on right away. Unfolding the snow-white handkerchief, Lucas noticed a crude black drawing of some beast on it. The Duke began to examine it with interest, making various assumptions as to who was depicted there. The versions varied, but they all stopped as soon as Grace shyly exclaimed that she had drawn it herself. Lucas froze, realizing his mistake, and then he excitedly exclaimed that he immediately understood that a horse was drawn there. The girl said that she wanted to draw a black horse, the symbol of the Black family, but her drawing skills were not that good. But she still wanted to give the gentleman something for his invitation. Grace drew from a horse on their estate, but, of course, no other horses could compare to the Duke's. A warm smile appeared on Lucas's lips, and then he said that this handkerchief was one of a kind and put it in his inner pocket. The Duke promised that he would cherish and take good care of it. Not so long ago, Lucas Black was something frightening to our heroine, but the Lucas Black that Grace met in person turned out to be very gentle and kind. He even gave her tea that helped her relax and reduce anxiety, so the girl would stop trembling so often. Lucas once told her that she shouldn't be afraid because she wasn't alone. All these moments made our heroine rethink her attitude towards this man and look at him in a new light. Despite everything that happened, Lucas Black didn't look at our heroine any differently, so she decided to tell him after dinner. The Duke suggested they start eating, and Grace looked at the food, which seemed to glow on the table. After analyzing the dishes on the table, the girl realized one thing and asked his Grace if he didn't eat steak. Lucas calmly replied that he simply didn't prefer meat, but the girl shouldn't pay attention to it. This was unexpected for the lady, and she speared a piece of meat and brought it to his mouth. She immediately felt the delicate scent of butter and the juice of the meat melting in her mouth. The longer you chewed, the more you could feel a slight sweetness, which strongly reminded the heroine of a vegetable. Grace exclaimed with a joyful smile that it was definitely pumpkin, and the Duke only smiled in response, not understanding what she was talking about. "Exactly," said a man who approached them with a small cart. The chef of the Duchy of Black proudly exclaimed that this meat had been aged with pumpkin, which gave it such a taste. The Duke immediately introduced his star chef, Kodia Mona, to the lady, and he bowed respectfully to the girl. This man personally brought the main dish of the evening and even kept the entire menu a secret from his master. The chef took a covered plate and suggested that the lady understood haute cuisine. Therefore, he very much hoped that his special dish would be to the girl's taste. Kodiamon proudly recounted that even His Majesty the King, when he was still a crown prince, constantly asked for this dish to be prepared. Lifting the lid, the chef revealed his signature bison skewers. Our heroine's face immediately changed. Both men were stunned when the young girl suddenly fell from her seat directly onto the stone tiles. Running up to her, Lucas anxiously asked if everything was all right. The heroine replied that she was fine, but the Duke decided it would be best for the girl to rest in her room. Then Lucas apologized to the chef, informing him that their dinner was over for the night. As soon as Grace returned to her room, she gulped down a whole glass of water to calm down and compose herself. Then she assured Julia that she was much better now. The maid began to worry that her mistress had indigestion again and offered to bring medicine, but Grace politely refused. She apologized to His Grace, who had prepared such a wonderful dinner. The girl and the chef were very ashamed. However, the Duke convinced the lady that there was nothing terrible, and he would personally explain everything to Kodiamon. Lucas decided to carefully ask the girl if it was all because of the last dish. Gathering her courage, our heroine asked the Duke if he had ever heard of ichnophobia. The man knew that it meant a fear of sharp objects. To be more precise, it is the fear of pointed ends. Most often these are knives, needles, and forks, but in the worst cases, corners of doors, walls, or even fingertips. Whenever people with this phobia see something sharp, their heart starts beating faster and their body freezes. Most often, Grace admitted that she was afraid of swords and needles, but at one time she couldn't even look at forks. The Duke flinched, realizing something important. The main character got ahead of him and said herself that she has ichnophobia, which is why she reacts that way every time. Lucas apologized to the lady and asked if the Marquis knew about it. The girl replied that unfortunately her family knows everything, but instead of a doctor's help, they decided to hide this fact. Although Marquis Kefren Olin is a member of the Senate, he always remained neutral and thus gained a reputation as a very righteous man. Lucas thought the same, but could this very Marquis be so disrespectful to his own daughter? Just thinking about it, the man's hands involuntarily tensed. Meeting the Marquis in person, the Duke did not feel the aura of grandeur from the rumors. However, when Kefren Olin announced that Duke Black should take responsibility, Lucas's opinion began to change slightly. The hero knew that his question might be unpleasant now, but he had to ask the lady. Grace flinched as soon as the Duke asked if she had experienced even greater humiliation at home. Only now did Lucas notice that the lady's cheek was all swollen. He knew that he hadn't imagined it that day, so now he wanted to hear confirmation from the girl herself. Grace remained silent, so the Duke assumed it was difficult for her to talk about it. Julia looked intently at her mistress and made an important decision. In a confident voice, she asked His Grace if he would help Lady Olin if she told him everything herself. Our heroine sharply jumped up from her seat, trying to stop the maid, but it was too late. Julia took the lady's hand and apologized, admitting that she no longer wanted to see her mistress suffer. Grace can't even imagine how helpless Julia feels, and how that feeling is consuming her from within. Our heroine never even thought that a maid could be in so much pain. The girl always thought it was only her concern, but it turned out that all this time Julia had been sharing the problem with her. The maid burst into tears and apologized to the lady again. Our heroine calmed the girl down and, with a warm smile, said that she had done it for her. Grace looked at his lordship and asked him to forgive Julia for her sake. The Duke, with a warm smile, replied that Milady need not worry, for, on the contrary, he saw the maid's care for her. The girl's mutual trust is admirable. Lucas said that in that case, he would contact Marquis Olin himself. The girls must have been quite exhausted, so the Duke suggested they rest peacefully at Black Estate today. Before leaving, Lucas asked Grace not to worry about the broken engagement, as not a single one of her traits was repulsive. He promised to protect the girl at all costs, and then left the room, wishing her good night. All this time, Chaim couldn't sit still. The adjutant was pacing like a dog, comforting himself with the thought that the Duke would soon come and say that the young lady was fine. Soon, the head butler announced that the master was coming, and Chaim's face lit up with a joyful smile. The assistant immediately showered his master with a bunch of questions, but they all quickly stopped as soon as he saw the anger on Lucas's face. This greatly surprised Chaim. He did not expect to see such a reaction, and the man especially tensed up when the Duke punched the wall. In a bewildered voice, Chaim asked him not to scare him like that. In response, the Duke merely coldly addressed his assistant with a question. What to do when, no matter how hard you try, you can't control your rage? The master's behavior was very strange. Chaim had never seen His Excellency like this. He couldn't understand what had made Lucas so furious, or what had even happened in that room. It had long been deep night outside, but our main character still couldn't fall asleep. Staying over, though not uncommon, was a first for Grace. This place was completely unfamiliar to her, and outside a thunderstorm was raging and lightning was flashing. How could anyone possibly sleep in such a place? Suddenly, the young girl heard a horse's whinny, which caught her attention. Grace went to the window to make sure she hadn't imagined it. Downstairs, there really was a beautiful black stallion. Perhaps it was the Black family stallion. The young girl assumed that the beast had been frightened by the thunderstorm and had run out of its stable. However, something needed to be done about it. So Grace decided she absolutely had to tell the butler. But then she noticed that Mr. Chaim was already running to catch her. Grace decided to pretend she hadn't noticed anything and go to the restroom, since she couldn't sleep anyway. Walking down the hallway, the young woman realized that in such darkness, the atmosphere was completely different. And these paintings on the wall are scary too. Grace felt like someone was watching her, but it turned out to be just a portrait, with which the heroine seemed to make eye contact. The young girl noticed that there were many paintings of horses in the mansion, perhaps because they are the symbol of the Black family. This family is one of the founders of the kingdom of Hieronymus. The other families also had great influence in the kingdom. Each had an animal as its symbol, and for the Black family, it was the black horse. Maybe that's why there are so many of them in the paintings. Grace stopped at the next portrait. The people depicted in it looked very much like his lordship. From the looks on these two people's faces, it was clear they were in love with each other. It's surprising that our heroine knows this feeling. With her family, it's quite unusual. A sudden dull thud made Grace wary, and then she noticed that something had fallen to the floor. It turned out to be a whip, which the girl immediately picked up. On its handle, some inscription in an ancient language was engraved. The young girl began to wonder what was written there. Unaware of the consequences, Grace began to read the inscription syllable by syllable, at the end of which it was said that one must follow their destiny. All of a sudden, the letters began to glow bright crimson. The main character was confused, but she didn't let go of the whip. As soon as the light stopped flickering so brightly, Grace wondered what had just happened. Suddenly, the very inscription that had previously been on the whip's handle completely transferred to our heroine's hand. It began to glow, and Grace immediately felt a sharp pain. The girl couldn't understand why she was in so much pain, and only then did she notice that the ancient text from the whip had appeared directly on her hand. Meanwhile, in the Olin family's house, the eldest child of the Norman family felt incredibly bored. He didn't even have anyone to pick on. Going to the tavern in such darkness wasn't an option either, so the guy started thinking about what he could do. Suddenly, he heard a sharp sound, as if something had collapsed. It definitely wasn't thunder. So Norman immediately ran to the window, threw it open, and began looking outside, trying to understand what had happened. Below was a huge black horse that the guy had never seen before. Apparently, it had knocked the gate off its hinges. However, that wasn't the main thing right now. So Norman went outside, ignoring the heavy rain. A joyful, nasty smile spread across his face. He began to examine the luxurious black mane and muscular body, the deep blue eyes, and the magical aura of the beast. All of this indicated that it was a legendary, sacred beast. Such creatures only served the best rulers in history. Norman began to believe that he was chosen. So he reached out his hand to the enormous beast, beckoning it closer. The huge black horse took a few steps towards the young man. As soon as her muzzle was very close to Norman's hand, the guy praised the beast for its intelligence and for recognizing its owner. The Marquis's son raised his hand, and a smirk escaped his lips. Suddenly, the huge beast decisively stepped towards the young master, causing him to stumble. Hearing a cry of pain outside the window, the butler Thomas abruptly jumped out of bed, not immediately understanding what the noise was. He, along with the other servants, ran outside to find out what had happened to the young master. Thomas froze as soon as he saw the huge black horse. Then, the enormous beast simply turned around and headed for the exit. The men watched it go, completely bewildered by what had just happened and how it could possibly be explained. First to emerge from the stupor was the butler Thomas, as soon as Master Norman exclaimed how much longer they were just going to stand there and watch. Thomas told his comrades not to stand around like statues, but to quickly carry their master into the house. The Marquis must be informed of everything immediately. Rage filled Norman's entire being. He gritted his teeth and promised himself that he would never forgive that wretched horse. Soon, Thomas reported to his master that Norman was injured and the estate gates were broken. The butler suggested that the black horse appeared closer to dawn, knocked down the gates, and then left through them. The Marquis threw papers at him and yelled that he didn't need excuses. He ordered to immediately announce a search for the horse and catch its owner at any cost. It is necessary to show at all costs what happens when their family is humiliated like this. Thomas reported that Lady Grace would stay with Duke Black for a couple more days, to which Catherine Allen replied that he didn't care. The most important thing now is Norman. He needs to be brought to the temple for treatment immediately, before it gets any worse. As soon as Thomas left the Marquis's office, he heard the maids whispering. One of them applied a compress to Mr. Norman, but the gentleman said it was too cold and threw it in the girl's face. Clearing his throat, Thomas was about to stop the girls before the Marquis heard their words. However, the head maid managed to do it faster. Miss Elia coldly looked at the maids and in a tired voice ordered them to watch their tongues. However, if the girls want to lose their heads, they can continue. Then the head maid left, and the maids began to discuss how her face never changed. She always remained emotionless. Besides, Miss Elia always walks quietly despite her limp. Butler Thomas appeared among the maids and asked if they really loved to gossip so much. The girls shrieked in fear, and Thomas said that if Miss Elia hadn't stopped them, the maids would have already gone to the Marquis's study. Returning to her room, the head maid took the framed photograph from her nightstand. She said that Norman was badly hurt, and now the Marquis was furious. But he doesn't worry about Lady Grace at all, even though she is also his daughter. When something like this happened, Miss Elia would miss Lady Eleanor even more, whose image was depicted in the photo. A long time ago, Elia arrived to work as a maid at Olin Manor. The young girl was extremely clumsy, which earned her a bad reputation in the mansion among the other servants. And then one day, she accidentally broke a mug in the hallway. The other maids advised their colleague to quickly clear away the shards before the Marquis saw them, but they didn't help due to being very busy. As a result, Elia was left alone with her problem. As she gathered the shards from the floor, the young girl wondered why everything was going wrong for her. Suddenly, she cut herself, and a drop of scarlet blood emerged from her finger and slowly trickled down. Elia tucked her knees under her and started thinking about quitting this place because it was very difficult for her. Suddenly, a beautiful girl ran up to her, took her hand, and exclaimed that she shouldn't clench like that. She was bleeding. This was Elia's first meeting with Lady Eleanor. The lady smiled at the maid and asked her to follow her. The surprising thing was that Eleanor asked to be called by her first name, without using formalities. She was kind and treated Elia as an equal, despite the fact that the young girl was just an ordinary maid. The head maid approached the window and looked at the carriage, and then she noticed the Marquis himself and the young master, whom the servants were helping to reach the carriage. Miss Elia was very worried about Lady Grace, hoping that she was doing well in the Duchy of Black. Meanwhile, our heroine carefully examined the ancient inscriptions on her arm. The pain was gone, and the letters were slightly blurred. Suddenly, the young girl heard a horse neighing outside the window, and this caught her attention. Unable to bear it any longer, Haim shouted loudly. He stomped his foot and told the huge horse to calm down immediately, or there would be nothing left of the lawn. The horse shook its head from side to side, so the adjutant decided to resort to their main trump card. Haim pulled a carrot from his pocket, confident that this premium treat would help him. However, a huge black horse simply knocked it out of her hands. At that very moment, the young mistress appeared from behind. Grace anxiously inquired what was going on there since early morning. Haim felt awkward and tried to explain to Milady that this horse had been unhappy since morning, but right now, this horse seemed quite calm, which made Haim angrily wonder why he was putting on this circus here. Never in her life had Grace seen such a big horse. It was even larger than all the others in this empire. The beast lowered its head, and the young girl was able to pet it. Grace called the horse very beautiful and asked if he really liked people, which brought a crooked smile to Haim's face. Unable to bear it, he yelled at the beast. Did he really decide to pretend to be a saint in front of Lady Grace? The main character admitted that there was something she was curious to know now. Why is the adjutant so courteous with this horse? Finding no better answer, Haim explained that it was the Duke's favorite stallion, which is why he treated it that way. Lucas Black told his assistant to treat the horse exactly the same way he treated him. Haim quoted his master's words so that my lady would understand the seriousness of those words. But the main character wondered if that was even normal. For a few seconds, the young girl hesitated, wondering whether she should talk about what happened or not. However, she still decided and turned to Mr. Haim. The adjutant was taken aback as soon as he learned that the lady had picked up the whip in the corridor and its text had transferred directly onto her hand. The girl said that when she read the text, it glowed and appeared on the back of her palm. As it turned out, this whip has been a family relic of the Duchy of Black for 750 years, and its power is very important. But it's not the lady's fault. Haim said that they were the ones who overlooked it. This is surprising. The adjutant would never have thought that Lady Grace knows ancient languages. Of course, this power is very important, but the magic transferred into Lady Allen could completely change her. Grace tensed, but still asked what it was. However, Haim could not tell the lady about the whip or its magic. Only Duke Black himself could answer that question. But the master had left on important business and would be away for some time. Haim apologized to Lady Grace and asked her to be patient until the Duke returned to the estate. He was pleased when Milady calmly agreed. Grace asked Sir Haim to inform her immediately if he found out anything, and she also asked for permission to search for information herself. Of course, the heroine knew that the Duke would not refuse her an answer, but this also concerned her, so the heroine did not want to just sit around. Haim gave a positive answer, promising to keep the lady's request in mind. As soon as the young lady left for the mansion, the adjutant told the horse that the lady had caught on quite quickly. They were, of course, told not to get involved with her, but now the heroes cannot simply leave things as they are. It seems they will have to send her a letter asking her to return. Sometime later, the aristocrat took a sip of coffee and immediately realized it was much tastier than at home. Several days have passed since Grace's arrival at Black Manor. The head butler offered the guest a Mont Blanc with nut cream and black tea so she could refresh herself. Our heroine didn't even notice how accustomed she had become to the local way of life. She honestly admitted that she had never seen such a beautiful Mont Blanc. Gabriel, with a smile, announced that Kotiaman had specially prepared it for the miss. While Lady Allen is visiting them, the chef prepares only round and cute dishes, wanting to please her completely. Kotia really wants to make amends for what happened at dinner. He constantly prepares delicious dishes and desserts for Grace. The girl couldn't understand why the chef was so worried. He even replaced the forks with spoons, but it turned out to be very tasty. The hazelnut cream goes perfectly with the soaked biscuit. Because of this, I wanted to eat more. Even the tea was fragrant. After finishing her meal, the main character asked to convey her gratitude to Kotia. Gabriel promised to do so, and Grace decided to ask when his Grace would finally return. The head butler apologized and explained that his master was currently dealing with territorial matters, so it was difficult to say. As soon as Lady Allen abruptly stood up, Gabriel became alert. But the girl asked him not to worry, as she would simply take a walk around the estate. Sometime later, the girls decided to rest on a bench. Julia was extremely indignant that this duke had invited them to his estate and then left himself. And he didn't even explain anything. Didn't even say when he'd be back, which is extremely disrespectful to guests. Suddenly, the maid remembered the letter and handed it to her mistress. In it, the head maid asked Lady Grace how she liked the duchy and if she was comfortable there. Elia also wrote that her young mistress had only been gone a short while, but she already missed her very much. The woman decided to inform Miss about what was currently happening at their estate. A couple of days ago, young Master Norman was wounded, and he is now at the temple receiving treatment. Sir Thomas said that a large black horse attacked him, which enraged the Marquis, but the servants are better off for it. Elia asked Miss not to worry about anything and just to rest. Suddenly, the girls heard a rustling sound next to them. Julia was taken aback when she saw a huge black horse, but the young lady reacted to it quite calmly. The large beast lowered its muzzle and began to sniff Lady Allen's hands. Julia screamed and shielded the young lady, asking her to be careful. Grace reassured her maid, saying that this horse most likely just wanted to be petted. There's no need to worry because there's nothing wrong with it. To her surprise, Julia realized that Grace had always loved animals and treated them with great tenderness, and the animals loved her in return. Now the main character was convinced that such a kind stallion simply could not have done this. Suddenly, Grace heard the Duke's voice, who said he thought Lady Allen liked horses. The main character froze in surprise. She began to look around, and Julia asked if something was wrong. Stunned, Grace hopefully asked the maid if she had also heard a man's voice, hoping she hadn't gone mad. But the girl replied that she hadn't heard anything, and a strange atmosphere of misunderstanding hung in the air. Grace was completely shaken as soon as the man's voice sounded in her head again, asking if she could really hear him. She screamed in fright, but the voice immediately calmed her, saying that he was Lucas. The man suggested that because of the magic the lady had absorbed, they were now connected, which made such a thing possible. This shocked Grace, and a bewildered Julia asked the miss if she was going to die. The main character lied, saying that she had simply seen a huge beetle flying by. Grace said she would sit down and rest, as that would surely make her feel better. Lucas praised the girl and explained that they only needed a thought to convey words. It was better not to speak aloud. The young girl took his words into account and mentally asked how such a thing was even possible. But the man replied that he didn't know. It was his first time experiencing something like that too. Lucas froze as soon as Lady Allen timidly inquired when he would finally return to the estate. She blushed terribly as soon as the Duke asked in response if the girl really wanted to see him. From excitement, the girl even stumbled, asking why the Duke thought about that. Lucas merely smirked slyly and replied that, by her head, it seemed as if the young lady was bored. The main character sharply jumped up from her seat and indignantly asked when she had said such a thing, making Julia look at her in surprise. The Duke admitted that he was just joking. He just enjoyed teasing her. In response, the girl asked him not to do that anymore, so Lucas apologized, saying that because of this, he wanted to know if it was true. Gathering her courage, the heroine asked if she gave an answer, would the Duke return sooner? Lucas froze because Grace confessed that she missed him, and then she exclaimed that the master was also ashamed and he did not hide it, deciding not to tease the miss like that anymore. Grace couldn't understand why she felt this way, perhaps because they hadn't seen each other for a long time or because of these jokes. Suddenly, the Duke announced that Haim had told him that the lady was interested in learning about magic. Unfortunately, Lucas couldn't explain anything to the lady. Nothing like this had ever happened, and this magic was a very important secret of his family. Grace understood everything perfectly and decided there was no point in insisting. But the man said that even though he couldn't explain everything to the lady, she could learn about magic. That's why it's better for her to do it herself. But the heroine didn't understand what His Grace the Duke meant. Without giving a specific answer, the man just smiled and asked her to follow him. Soon, Grace arrived at the huge library located in Blackwood Manor and was delighted by its scale. Lucas proudly explained that it was his personal library, and perhaps there the lady could find information about his family. And then our heroine saw it. An adventure novel by Jean Hamilton, a story about a mysterious forest and an uninhabited island. And when Grace also noticed the history of seeds, which hasn't been printed for 1,000 years, her joy knew no bounds. The man called out to the lady in confusion, and she finally came to her senses. The main character apologized and explained that she simply loved plants very much. Lucas smiled and replied that there was nothing wrong with that. Lady Allen could take any books from here. In that case, Grace chose a whole list of books that she wanted to read. Meanwhile, Julia looked at her mistress through the window and realized that she was happy now, which meant there was no need to worry. Now our heroine understood why she had to figure it out on her own. The Duke allowed her to come here any time. Turning her head, the lady noticed a photo frame with a child in it, and this caught her attention. She reached out for it, but the Duke immediately told her to stop. No matter how much Lucas screamed, the girl could not be stopped. The photograph showed a dark-haired boy standing with a plush bunny toy and crying. Grace thought it was very sweet, and Lucas couldn't hide his embarrassment. The girl wondered if this adorable child, like Duke Kane's brother, had red hair. So the heroine concluded that this was Lucas's cousin. She was taken aback as soon as the Duke confessed that it was him. Looking at this photo, the main character couldn't believe it was actually the same person. After all, this boy has curly hair, and he's holding a toy and crying. Lucas said that he once had curly hair. Just think, this cute little boy grew into such a brutal man. It's amazing. Human nature is so mysterious. You never know what discoveries it might still present. An embarrassed Lucas decided to change the subject and suggested to Grace that they look for books. Grace only now remembered that she had come for books. The Duke's incredible maturity had simply distracted her. Soon, the main character sat down at the table and began to read. The first thing she got her hands on was the legend of the founding of Hieronymus. More than 700 years ago, 7 brave knights united to kill the witch's 7 minions. As a result, they managed to seize the witch's lands. However, the witch, having lost her possessions, cursed the king and 6 knights before disappearing. This was revenge against those who dared to desecrate her lands. From that moment on, the knights' strength became their weakness, and weakness became strength. At this point, the legend in the book ended. The main character assumed that these 7 cursed ones were the 7 founding families. So, this includes the royal family, the Black family, the O'Neill family, the Servient family, the Quintana family, the Kanesh family, and the Duver family. Only members of each family know the effects of the curse, and if they tell anyone else about them, the curse will intensify. This means the 7 founding families of Hieronymus are cursed, and only family members can reveal the details of the curse. The magic from the whip is connected to the curse, which is why the Duke cannot tell Grace anything. Lucas said that the girl's assumptions were correct. So, to sort all this out, we need to get married. Grace blushed terribly as soon as she heard that. Lucas was only partly joking now, and he very much hoped that Lady Grace would still consider his words. And it's not just about the secret of the curse, but there is also another reason. However, the Duke didn't have time to name it, as the door suddenly burst open and the head butler appeared on the threshold. Gabriel immediately apologized to the miss for scaring her. He just heard the lady's voice and thought something had happened. Our heroine was even surprised that she had spoken so loudly. The head butler informed her that this was the Duke's private library, and so he asked if the lady was perhaps looking for something here. Grace reminded him that Gabriel himself had said that if she wanted to read, she could take any book from here. She politely asked the butler to allow her to read alone, and the man did not object. Sometime later, night fell, but the girl still couldn't fall asleep. She was still tormented by the fact that the Duke wanted to tell her something, but Gabriel prevented him from doing so. Then Grace began to think about the curse that remained even now, 700 years later. The question kept swirling in her mind, what it was like to bear the consequences of her ancestors' sin. Most likely his Grace the Duke is scared right now. And then Grace began to wonder why the young Duke was crying so bitterly in that photograph. As a result of all these thoughts, our heroine fell asleep. That night she dreamed of riding a black horse with the little Duke Black. At the same time, at the Hit Investigation Bureau, the man asked Marquis Oline why he had come to him at such a late hour. Catherine Oline directly asked if he was in charge here, to which the man replied that the guest had not come here for that question, because it seemed to the hero that the Marquis was much more interested in finding out who had harmed his precious son. The Marquis tensed, not understanding how this man knew about it. The blonde man immediately apologized for his rudeness and explained that he simply didn't like empty talk. Standing before Catherine Oline right now was the head of Hith's intelligence agency, named Hith Servient. In Hieronymus, information is currency, especially if it bears the seal of the Servient house. This is a family that solidified its power solely through the value of information. They collect information regardless of who it's about. Whether it's true or not, that's not so important to them, because absolutely any information can be used. You must be silent when the snake is crawling. Marquis Oline mentally repeated this saying several times as a reminder. Looking into the eyes of the head of the intelligence agency, Catherine thought that it would be better for him not to open his mouth unnecessarily. But the head of House Servient felt quite calm. The Hit Investigation Bureau, which fleeces visitors, is named after him. However, the Marquis was convinced that he too should be reckoned with. He was just a brat who inherited the title. Heath noticed that Marquis Allen was quite cautious now. It was obvious why the head of the Allen family had come, but so far the aristocrat had not uttered a word. Clenching her teeth in anger, Catherine mentally called this arrogant guy a jerk. He said he was looking for a wild horse that had broken through his estate gates last night and broken his son's rib. The head of the intelligence agency handed the Marquis a small piece of paper. It stated the price of the investigation, which was as much as 800,000 grangs. Heath said with a smile. If the Marquis agreed to such terms, he could sign and the contract would be concluded. However, Catherine exclaimed that this was a complete scam, but the guy innocently explained that he even gave a discount, because the information about this horse is red, the highest level. But if the Marquis is not satisfied with something, he can leave. Catherine O'Lean stood up, saying that apparently he had come to the wrong place. However, he froze as soon as the head of intelligence gave an accurate description of the horse, including all the small details. Heath added that this creature had been encountered many times before. The Marquis exclaims that he would not give a single coin to this swindler. And then he left the room, slamming the door loudly, which brought a smile to Heath's lips. This situation seemed amusing to the head of the intelligence agency. Why would he suddenly rage in the Olin estate? The reason in his head was obvious. Heath's secretary, Urias, entered the room and informed the lord that Marquis Olin had already left. It took a little effort, but Urias resolved everything and managed to get 60,000 grangs for the consultation. Heath smiled and said that it was time for him to visit someone. As soon as morning came, Grace woke up and stretched in bed to loosen her muscles. For some reason, the heroine felt great today, and if so, then she needed to enjoy this feeling to the fullest. The main character was filled with determination. However, her enthusiasm quickly waned because there was absolutely nothing to do in the Duchy of Black. Life in this place is like this. Wake up, have breakfast. Then, go for a walk with her maid Julia and explore the huge ducal garden from end to end. After that, Grace would go to the library and read. Then tea time, meditation, conversations with Kotia, and so on. It sounds so peaceful that our heroine even felt ashamed. Today, Julia went to the Allen estate for some things, so the girl won't be here today, but she promised to return soon. If she thought about it, Grace hadn't heard the Duke anymore. Perhaps the connection had some condition. Life here is calm and pleasant. The heroine has everything she needs, but for some reason she felt lonely. The Duke's words came to mind, that although he had joked before, the lady should still think about it. Grace caught herself realizing that at some point, Mr. Black had started calling her by her first name. She decided to take a risk and also mentally called the man by his first name. The heroine immediately began to scold herself, calling herself crazy. How could she so calmly call the Duke by his first name? For some reason, the lady's heart began to beat faster. Grace explained this to herself by saying that she was simply scared, which is why she had such a physical reaction. Suddenly, she heard Lucas's voice in her head. The heroine didn't immediately understand and asked who was there, to which the man, smiling, replied that she herself had called him, and now she was surprised. Lucas became curious, wondering if Grace had called him this time because she wanted to see him. The main character apologized and explained that she just wanted to check because the gentleman's voice kept appearing and disappearing. In response, Lucas asked if she had managed to figure it out. Grace gave a positive answer and realized that she just needed to think about the Duke. Lucas's heart began to beat faster, and the young girl immediately exclaimed that she didn't mean that at all. The man replied that he hadn't said anything, but our heroine perfectly understood that the Duke was lying now. She told Lucas that she just thought about him when she woke up, but then added that she just wanted to understand magic. Grace realized that the more she spoke, the more it all sounded like excuses. But Duke Black asked Milady not to explain anything, as he was not going to tease her anymore. Then the man apologized for being such a terrible host and unable to properly receive guests. However, Grace reassured him, saying there was no need to worry. She was very surprised when the Duke suddenly suggested a horseback ride. At that very moment, our heroine heard the sound of approaching hooves. Lucas explained that they were walking somewhere nearby at that time, and this caught the young girl's attention. She noticed a huge black horse that slowly approached her. Soon the young girl learned that there was a beautiful forest near Black Manor. Lucas said that he always comes here when he wants to run, so it's a great place for horseback riding. However, Grace still doubted whether she could really ride this stallion. After all, she remembered perfectly well that this horse was the Grand Duke's favorite, and he cherished it very much. But Lucas reassured the girl, saying that it would be an honor for the stallion to carry her, which made the lady laugh softly. The Duke even prepared clothes for her in advance, for which the girl was grateful. Feeling embarrassed, Lucas said that he had asked Chaim for a good reason. Grace was very surprised by the fact that the Duke knew her size, to which the man replied that he had simply estimated it by eye. But in reality, Lucas was explaining to the merchant what it was like to hug her. Still, the main character didn't quite believe the Duke, as this outfit fit too well for a simple guess. Lucas announced that there were more important matters now and asked her to get on the stallion. For our heroine, it turned out to be too high, but the Duke asked the girl not to worry, as the beast would adjust itself. Grace continued to doubt, but still slowly climbed onto the steed. As soon as she managed to do this, the girl caught herself thinking that she had become as if 3 times taller. Now much was visible. Suddenly, the stallion bolted from its spot, which was very unexpected for the young girl, and she gripped the reins tighter. The beast was racing so fast that Grace couldn't help but scream in fear. She had already begun to say goodbye to life, telling the Grand Duke that it was happening too fast for her. In response, Lucas asked Lady Olin to trust him and just straighten her back, assuring her that she definitely wouldn't fall. Overcoming her fear, Grace still trusted the man. She followed his clear instructions: press her legs to her sides but not too hard, and completely straighten her back. As soon as all this was done, he asked the lady to open her eyes. The main character felt joy inside herself. For the first time, she felt so free and alive. She's still a little scared, but happy nonetheless. It was hard just now, but now it's very easy. Grace had a feeling as if she had found a second wind. Soon the stallion stopped, deciding to rest, and the main character, along with him, sank onto the grass. She began to stroke the beast's massive neck, saying that he was very fast and strong. Suddenly, the young girl became curious to know his name. The question clearly stumped the Duke, and he informed Lady Olin that the stallion's name was Lucky. The main character believed Lucas's words and praised Lucky, as he had tried very hard. She pressed her lips to his and uttered words of gratitude. Grace immediately heard the Duke's agitated voice in her head, suggesting she return to the mansion as it was starting to get cold. The main character agreed, as she realized that she had gotten sweaty during that time, and a wash wouldn't hurt. She said goodbye to Lucky, promising to see him later. Taking a warm bubble bath is very pleasant. Julia, who had just returned, asked if Miss enjoyed riding the horse, and Grace replied that it was a lot of fun. The maid was glad to hear that and asked how the water was for the lady. Grace responded perfectly, adding that the shampoo also smelled good. At home, our heroine couldn't even dream of such a thing. Despite Grace belonging to the Marquis's family, her father deprived her of all luxury so that she would grow up modest. He, in turn, turned a blind eye to Norman because he was the heir. And he, in turn, controlled almost every aspect of Grace's life, including her dresses, jewelry, food, entertainment, and even her walks. At some point, despite her family, Grace, through much effort, achieved her own title and income. And only then did the girl start allowing herself a little more, because her father did everything for his own sake. He spent all his accumulated money bribing the consulate. As a result of this, he was able to become a political figure. The Marquis even wants to use his own children to his advantage in marriages of convenience, just to achieve his goals. These thoughts haunted Grace even before sleep. In reality, thinking about family is terribly unpleasant. So the young woman decided to put all thoughts aside and go to sleep instead. Especially since while she is in the Duchy of Black, our heroine can fully enjoy the silence. However, silence cannot last long, and after a couple of days, a real commotion began. The woman sitting opposite Grace announced that her house had the best tea in the kingdom, so Miss had to try it. The main character couldn't understand how it happened. Setting the cup down on the table, the woman asked the lady not to be afraid of her. She confessed that their Lucas had told her a lot about Miss. Right now, sitting in front of our heroine is Selina Black, who is the lady of the Black family. She was very glad to meet Miss Allen in person, and Grace replied to the Duchess that it was an honor for her to meet her. Selina perked up and asked not to address her so formally, as they would soon be family anyway, so the woman asked to simply call her by her first name. This was very embarrassing, but Grace managed to pronounce the name Selina. This sounded so sweet in the Duchess's eyes that she couldn't hide the smile that appeared on her face. She had always only had sons, so now Selina is very pleased to see such an elegant lady. The main character was surprised by the fact that the Duchess was acting so simply around her. This was very unusual, but next to her, the girl felt the warmth she so desperately wanted to receive. The Duchess offered a couple more desserts, but Grace immediately refused. Kotia said he would bring everything right away, and Selina asked the lady not to be shy, saying that she hadn't eaten it in so long. The main character realized that it was pointless to object, so she simply accepted her ladyship's will. And now, let's figure out how all this happened and go back in time a couple of hours. As soon as Grace dismounted the black stallion, someone asked her if the lady was already used to riding. It turned out to be Sir Haim, who had suddenly appeared out of nowhere. She told the adjutant that Lucky was a very good horse, so it wasn't difficult to get used to him. Grace could confidently call him a true gentleman. Grinning, Haim said that Lucky was a very picky horse and wouldn't let just anyone ride him. Apparently, the lady simply pleased him. While the stallion and Haim glared at each other with displeased looks, our heroine noticed something strange. She had never seen such a carriage in the duchy before. Grace decided to ask Sir Haim if he was expecting guests, and the man, confused, replied that nothing of the sort was planned. Suddenly, both the horse and the adjutant froze in astonishment, realizing something. A beautiful woman with light hair emerged from the carriage and told Haim that they hadn't seen each other in a long time. While her maid was scolding Haim for the poor reception of her mistress after a long meeting, the main character realized something. Before her now stands Duke Lucas's mother, Duchess Selina Black. The blonde said that she was probably carsick from the long journey, so the maid offered her some water, and then she gestured to Haim to immediately solve this problem. The adjutant wanted to object, but the woman pulled his lip even tighter, saying that he had become too talkative lately. Haim ran away, and Selina quietly laughed, saying that you couldn't find such workers anywhere. While the women talked to each other, Grace found herself abandoned and forgotten, which made her feel somewhat awkward. At that very moment, the Duchess turned her attention to her. The main character's face immediately changed. Now panic was visible on it, because Duchess Black went straight to her. Grace immediately bowed her head and greeted Duchess Selina, feeling her heart pound wildly with fear. But suddenly, Selina took the girl's hand and joyfully exclaimed her name. The Duchess's attention was drawn to her long, shiny black hair like obsidian, as well as the mysterious purple eyes of the young girl. All of this told Duchess Black that the very Lady Grace Allen stood right before her. The main character couldn't understand what was happening, and the woman, meanwhile, with a wide smile on her face, offered to have a cup of tea. Therefore, we can now return to the present time. The Duchess couldn't take her eyes off this lovely girl. Some time ago, Selina received a letter stating that the whip's curse had fallen upon Miss Grace's hand. Lucas wished for his mother to arrive quickly and help, which greatly surprised Selina, as her son had never spoken so flatteringly about the lady. He is a responsible and mature person, but Lucas focused too much on love, so Selina even began to think that her child had overly high standards. Then something happened that greatly surprised the Duchess. A beautiful butterfly landed on Lady Allen's hair. Selina assumed it had simply mistaken the lady for a flower, and was very touched by the lady's reaction. If you think about it, something similar happened when the Duchess first met Felix. The man said it was a morpho butterfly. You rarely see them here because they live in distant places. Grace, just like Felix once did, said that the wings of this butterfly were very similar to the color of the Duchess's eyes. All playfulness left Selina's face, and she stared at the lady without blinking. Meanwhile, Grace, with a smile, explained that the blue color of these wings comes from the unique structure of the wing's surface. Suddenly, the butterfly flew away, and our heroine realized that the Duchess might not like insects. So she immediately began to apologize, trying to explain that this butterfly looked very rare. The Duchess smiled warmly and replied that she had just remembered something. The next moment, Selena said something that greatly surprised Grace. The Duchess perfectly understood that such a thing is not asked for at a first meeting, but she still asked the lady to seriously consider marriage. Moreover, the engagement is already being discussed, and it is obvious that the young people are not indifferent to each other. It was true. The main character admitted to herself that she was no longer so afraid of the Duke. During this time, she had seen many of his good sides and already felt that they were close. However, Grace was not yet sure of her feelings, and besides, they hadn't even dealt with the whip's curse yet. The lady remained silent, so the Duchess immediately apologized and explained that she did not want to burden the girl. She fully supports the children's engagement and wouldn't mind at all if Grace decides to stay at Black Manor. At that very moment, the Duchess asked who was eavesdropping on them, which made the black horse startle and give itself away. Grace was happy to see Lucky, but suddenly the Duchess stood up sharply and called the stallion Lucas. She asked why the man hadn't even come to say hello, and then she started scolding Lucas because a gentleman should not interrupt two ladies' conversation. The main character was in such shock that she couldn't tell if she had imagined it. Returning to the table, the Duchess apologized to Grace and explained that she simply hadn't seen Lucas in a very long time. This woman called Lucky Lucas again. The thought occurred to her that the Duke himself named the horse after himself and tells everyone else its name is Lucky, so there are no questions. This sounded plausible, so the girl just thought that everyone in this estate loved horses very much. The Duchess looked carefully at the lady and asked if she had a favorite tea. But Grace didn't give a clear answer, as she liked all of them. To be more precise, the young woman enjoyed the process of tea drinking itself. Brewing and drinking tea are relaxing, and even on the most difficult and confusing days, they help one to compose themselves. Grace had heard that tea ceremonies were held abroad to cultivate the mind and body. Upon hearing this, the Duchess called it wonderful. Personally, she preferred fruit teas to black ones like Assam and Earl Grey. They were more refreshing. The Duchess confessed that her husband, Felix, sometimes teased her that her food preferences were like a child's. And then Selena admitted that she really missed those moments. The main character had heard that the previous Duke died young in an accident, but the Duchess still continued to love him. Grace immediately pictured her mother's caring face. She admitted that her mother also loved fruit teas. When Grace was curious, she would smile and bring the cup closer so her daughter could enjoy the scent. The Duchess listened carefully to the lady's story, and then she came to the conclusion that the girl missed her mother very much. Selena immediately began to apologize for her words, but Grace exclaimed that the Duchess was not to blame at all. On the contrary, the main character was glad that she could talk about her mother after so many years, because her father forbids mentioning that woman, so Grace didn't really have anyone to discuss her with. So the girl was glad that she could talk to Selena about such things. That's worth a lot. The main character was taken aback as soon as she noticed the surprise on her ladyship's face, and immediately began to apologize for her rudeness. In response, Selena smiled warmly and asked Grace to continue. Our heroine blushed terribly and thanked the woman. Suddenly, something large poked Grace's ear, and she felt someone's breath. It turned out to be Lucky, so the main character assumed he had also come to comfort her. Delight appeared on the Duchess's face, and then she said that they looked very good together, as if they had stepped out of the pages of some novel. Unexpectedly, the Duchess announced that the first time she saw Lucas turn into a horse, she almost died of fear. When Selena was running away, he grabbed her. Their hands slightly touched, and then Lucas turned into a horse. Just in case, the main character decided to ask if this huge black horse was actually the Duke. Selena calmly answered yes. A heavy atmosphere suddenly hung over the table, where only the sound of the lady drinking tea could be heard. Only now did the Duchess realize that Lucas had not explained anything to Grace. But now nothing could be done. Who but a mother could solve such problems? And besides, she wouldn't want to lose Miss Grace. Selena clapped her hands and suggested that they both go for a walk to clear up any misunderstandings at the same time. The stallion froze, and our heroine choked on her tea at such an unexpected proposal. Throughout her life, the Duchess lived by only one motto: you can't refuse someone who smiles, so she assured the lady that it would be fun. As a result, Grace and the Duke went for a walk together. The lady looked coldly at Lucas and informed him that he was too close and he should stay away from her. The Duke had no choice but to submit to Miss Allen's will. Suddenly, the young woman wondered if the Duke had been deceiving her all this time. Lucas guiltily apologized, and a blush appeared on Grace's cheeks. He confessed that he didn't want to deceive the girl, he just really enjoyed their mental communication. And it seemed that way it became easier for Grace to communicate with him, and it became harder to tell the truth with each passing day. The heroine couldn't understand what that pitiful voice was. She was so scared that the Duke hadn't returned for so long. Lucas repeated again that he would definitely protect Grace. A little earlier, the Duchess called the lady to her to explain how to return Lucas to human form. Once the curse has been transferred from the whip, everything will be easier. And then she told the young girl what she needed to do. The Duke once again said that he was truly sorry, and suddenly, the main character sharply turned around and exclaimed, "No!" She absolutely doesn't like him through his thoughts, so she resolutely headed towards the black stallion. She reached out her hand, on which an inscription began to glow, towards Lucas. Selena had told her the method, which meant the Duke now had to stand still and not move. The main character asked the Duke to close his eyes and then hugged him tightly around the neck. At that very moment, the inscription on the young girl's hand began to glow even brighter. Finally, Lucas took on his human form. Both heroes were confused. The Duke asked if Grace wasn't angry with him, but she replied that she was. But in reality, the heroine was just scared because of the curse on her hand and because the people in the mansion couldn't tell her anything. Moreover, she was frightened by the Duke, who had disappeared and hadn't returned. Lucas listened carefully to the young lady's indignation, not daring to interrupt her. Meanwhile, Grace coldly added that she hadn't even known anything. The man tried to explain everything, but the girl interrupted him, saying that she, on the contrary, had been pretending to be calm. The Duke constantly insisted that he would tell her everything as soon as he returned, and that Grace just needed to wait a little. However, instead of that, he should have simply told the truth. Lucas turned to Grace again, but the heroine raised her voice and said that, on the other hand, she could understand him. It was also difficult for her to tell her secret. The Duke said in a sad tone that he was truly very sorry. He didn't want to make Grace worry. He felt that the young girl wouldn't be able to accept this side of him. Our heroine understood perfectly well that she was acting childishly. If she told about the curse, a terrible misfortune would befall the house. Besides, Grace was sure she wouldn't have believed it if she hadn't seen everything with her own eyes. In reality, our heroine was more angry that Duke Black didn't believe her. Lucas asked the lady not to be silent and reached out his hand to her face, but the main character sharply stopped him. The man straightened up abruptly, afraid of causing the lady even greater anger. But unexpectedly, Grace said in a calm tone that she very much hoped that this would not happen again. Since they are planning a marriage, such a thing should not happen between them. Lucas froze. If Lady Allen started talking about such things, it meant she had decided to marry him. The Duke couldn't hide his surprise, and the main character admitted that she had thought about it a lot. Since childhood, she had to endure her father and Norman, which made Grace unable to understand what to do. It was for this reason that it was difficult for her to understand men. However, the girl could confidently say that Duke Black was different. He always listened to the heroine, stood up for her, and accepted Grace's weakness, which even her family tried to hide. But to be honest, the main character couldn't deny that Lucas was also a little strange. That's why she really thought that they could get married. Lucas's face turned completely crimson with embarrassment at the words he heard. Grace wanted to say something else, but the man stopped her, holding her tightly. The man began to utter words of gratitude repeatedly, confessing that he had thought the lady would never forgive him. Suddenly, Lucas realized what he was doing right now. He sharply pulled away and apologized, explaining that he was just very happy, and Grace awkwardly replied that it was okay. Our heroes approached the lake and stopped. The Duke caught himself thinking that he couldn't take his eyes off our heroine. She looked more beautiful than ever now. He confessed to Grace that he didn't believe in marriages without feelings. He was never interested in a marriage of convenience, and the man couldn't understand how one could marry someone just for the sake of family status. But when Lucas met Grace, everything changed. The man admitted that he sometimes even followed the girl out of curiosity, which shocked our heroine. The hero explained that Grace had always been a noble lady who behaved so openly with orphans. During the drought, she even saved many from starvation. Then Lucas learned that Grace was much more expressive and interesting than he had thought. The Duke came closer, took the girl's hand in his, and said that she was a wonderful person. That's why he wanted to get to know her better, so he asked Grace to allow him to. The man whispered to the girl to close her eyes, and then began to slowly approach her lips. Grace perfectly understood that she should refuse right now. Suddenly, the main character's eyes widened as soon as she realized an important detail. If Lucky is Duke Black himself, then Lucas also remembers all those moments, including the kiss. This realization made the main character feel even more awkward. She sharply pushed Lucas away, not letting the kiss happen, and then, blushing with embarrassment, she said that she knew the Duke shouldn't be forgiven so easily. Grace called the Duke a liar and then simply ran away to the mansion. Returning to his office, Duke Black realized that he had accumulated a lot of work during this time. It was strange. Lucas was sure he had delegated all matters to Chaim, but apparently he couldn't keep up with them. Be that as it may, the Duke was grateful to Miss Grace for making him human again. A moment flashed in the man's mind when he almost kissed the girl. Apparently, the Duke would not be sleeping tonight. The next day, our heroes met again in Duke Black's study. Seeing Grace's stern face, the man tried to carefully ask if she still hadn't forgiven him. The main character just waved him off and replied, quote, _0___. Lucas said that it was sad. He had even made Grace's favorite fruit tea, but it was all in vain. Our heroine remembered that the Duke had been eavesdropping at that tea party. This man couldn't give her a moment of peace. Apparently, the Duke thinks Grace will just fall for it, but the girl couldn't help but admit that this tea was indeed delicious. In the end, she did fall for it. The Duke was glad to see that Grace liked it. He smirked slyly and asked the girl if he would get anything in return for making her tea. Grace didn't understand what he meant, and Lucas explained that when he was a horse, ladies often touched him, stroked him, and even kissed him. Our heroine was even taken aback by the Duke's jokes. Lucas said that the Black family has a tradition. If someone gives you your favorite food, that person must kiss them in return. Grace exclaimed in surprise, "Is that really true?" And the man with a wide smile replied, "No, he just liked watching her reaction." He called Grace too trusting. The man didn't know if it could be called naivety, but the prognosis was clearly not good. The main character was silent for a few seconds, and then called the Duke shameless. Suddenly, the man resolutely asked the girl to call him by his name. He reminded her that Grace had done this before, which made the young girl feel even more awkward. The heroine tried to explain that things were different then. It was hard to explain, but calling the Duke by his first name was somehow disrespectful. Lucas sighed sadly and said that if it was so difficult for the lady, he wouldn't force it. Would Grace now always see the man as lucky? But he was right. She couldn't always call him Duke. The main character was about to say his name when Duchess Black suddenly appeared in the room and interrupted her. With a playful smile on her face, the woman asked if the lovebirds had already started cooing, as the sun had only just risen. Lucas unhappily asked his mother if she was going somewhere, and Selena said she wanted to visit an antique shop in the east. Noticing the interest on Grace's face, the Duchess suggested they go together. The Duke immediately perked up and wanted to say that in that case, he would go too. However, a heavy hand suddenly rested on his shoulder. It was Hames. The adjutant shook his head negatively and said that the Duke couldn't, which caused confusion on Lucas's face. Hames explained that until the master finished with the papers, he would never go. Lucas tried to say he would do it later, but the assistant was adamant. He had already done a lot of work while the Duke was away. Managing the estate, the vassals, business reports, dealing with employee complaints, it's true torture. Be that as it may, shopping is definitely not in the cards for the Duke today. Selena took our heroine's hand and informed her that it was time for them to go. Soon they got into the carriage and set off. Serena asked Grace if she had ever been to the East, and our heroine replied that she had, a couple of times. Compared to Central Park or the West, it's a bit unfinished, but it's very old. You can always find something ancient there, including books and trinkets. Serena said that young people usually don't go to the East, but Grace actually liked the Eastern District for another reason. Her orphanage is located there. It doesn't house many children, but at least they always have food and teachers. Our heroine even invented preservatives for them. When Grace first went there, she saw the little ones eating grass just to fill their stomachs. But even despite this, smiles shone on their faces. Children, if they saw it, it looked ordinary, and it grew everywhere, so they didn't pay attention to it. The leaves can be dried and ground into a powder, and the berries can be baked or made into jam. After many months of research, the main character managed to find a way to make it edible. This food spread to all the orphanages in the kingdom. Then the rest of the needy learned about it. Thanks to this, there are no more starving children in the kingdom. Who would have thought that an ordinary weed would turn out to be so useful? While Grace was thinking about how incredible nature is, the Duchess noticed that they had already arrived. The woman asked the lady to wait for her a little, as she was going to speak with the owner. She winked at Grace, saying that if the girl saw something she liked, she shouldn't hesitate to mention it. The main character began to look at different things with interest. Suddenly, her attention was drawn to a small black horse figurine, and the girl wondered how the Duke would react to such a gift. Grace even imagined him taking this little one in his arms and swearing to protect him like the apple of his eye. Suddenly, the girl heard a cough next to her and sharply turned around. It turned out to be a light-haired man who was racked with an incredible cough. Grace immediately ran up to him to find out if the stranger was all right. Things were clearly bad. The main character noticed that the man's breathing was very labored. She decided to go for help now, but the unfamiliar man didn't let her, sharply grabbing her arm. Grace gave him a surprised look. The man called the lady very kind, adding that he was feeling better now. The thought that this man was very handsome immediately crossed the young girl's mind. This stranger was seized by a cough again. Grace decided to call someone anyway, asking if the man had an escort, to which he replied that his servant had gone for medicine. Suddenly, the girl felt that the man's hand was cold as ice, even through the glove. The handsome man looked at Miss with hope and asked her to stay by his side until the servant returned. Of course, Grace agreed, and did so with such determination that the head of the intelligence agency was even surprised. The main character promised that she would stay by the man's side. In fact, the Lord didn't think he would hear such wonderful words from the lady. The girl was so resolute that Heath was even taken aback. Spending time with the Duke, Grace didn't even notice how she became bolder. Suddenly, the handsome man addressed our heroine. He knew that his further request might seem impolite, but he still asked the lady to lend him her arm. Heath explained that standing was more comfortable than sitting. His head had started to spin, so he hoped the lady would agree to support him. The handsome man called himself a helpless adult. The Lord immediately asked the lady to forget everything he had just said. But suddenly Grace revealed that she herself sometimes gets sick, so the man could take her hand. Some time later, the main character asked the stranger how he was feeling. They both stood, Grace holding this handsome man's hand with full determination. A sly smile appeared on her face as soon as she asked if the man felt better after such a manipulation. Unable to resist, Heath turned away from the lady and laughed, but the girl innocently thought he was feeling sick again due to a cough. The man apologized and explained that this unexpected pose had confused him. Heath caught himself thinking that if he was so awkward with a beautiful lady, he could have just declined. However, the young woman turned out to be much more interesting than he had thought. Therefore, Heath told our heroine that she had intrigued him. Grace looked into the man's beautiful, piercing eyes, the irises of which seemed to glow with a scarlet light. Unexpectedly for Heath, she announced that the servant was taking too long, even though enough time had passed. Perhaps something could have happened to this person on the way. She decided she needed to go and check, but suddenly the stranger, whose face showed concern, stopped her. The hero assured the lady that he was feeling much better now. The main character wanted to insist on searching, but suddenly this handsome man took her hand. The next moment, his lips gently touched the back of Grace's hand. The stranger exclaimed that he had caused so much trouble to the lady he had just met, and had to thank her for her kindness. Grace tried to say that she hadn't done anything special, but the man was determined to repay the milady. With a smile on his face, he said his name was Heath Servient, but asked to be called just Heath. Our heroine nodded, and then wondered if it was just her imagination that this man had been trying to look into her eyes from the very beginning. Suddenly, the servant returned and apologized to his master for being late. Heath felt very sorry, but now he had to go back, so Grace wished him a good journey. Finally, the Lord said a phrase. He very much hopes that he and Lady Allen will meet again. This greatly surprised our heroine, because she certainly had not told the man her name. But the carriage drove away, and she never had a chance to ask anything. On the way home, Heath could only think that this was very strange, as he had definitely used charm magic on this girl. However, for some reason, it didn't work. Perhaps it's a side effect of the curse, or an unexpected advantage. The 7 families each possess their own unique power. For example, the inhuman strength of House Black. The innate ability of Servient is charm. Meet their gaze and your mind clouds, while a bite from their fangs allows them to subjugate your will. But it didn't work on Grace Allen. Perhaps the reason was that ancient writings were depicted on the lady's hand. No matter what it was, he too still didn't like it. And seeing the master's mood, Uriah suggested canceling further plans. However, the man refused, as he still had to go. Because those damn old farts definitely won't wait. All this time, the main character was waiting for Selena, and had even begun to regret not bringing a book with her. The Duchess's sudden voice greatly pleased Grace. The woman was coming down from the 2nd floor with a huge number of boxes, apologizing to the girl for the delay. Grace helped by taking a few boxes, and said that so many interesting things had happened there during that time. But suddenly, the lady noticed a box in the Duchess's hands and asked with surprise what it was. Selena lifted it higher and mysteriously vanished. In fact, the Duchess had been looking for this item for a long time, and then the owner of this place announced that he had miraculously managed to find it. She placed an unfamiliar container on the table and explained that it was called a dream sensor. The main character froze, horror appearing on her face, as she didn't understand how this thing had gotten there. The Duchess immediately noticed how Lady Allen's mood had changed, but she didn't show it, asking the girl to take the dream sensor in her hands. The main character fulfilled her request, but suddenly noticed something strange. There's a scratch on this item, which led the young girl to a certain conclusion. Selena decided to ask the lady if she recognized this item. She saw Grace hesitate with her answer, so she asked her not to worry. Gathering her courage, the main character revealed that this item was a relic of her deceased mother. Selena couldn't understand, if that was the case, why such a valuable item ended up at an auction. This answer greatly surprised Duchess Black. However, Grace herself couldn't say for sure why this item ended up here. Unless there's only one explanation for this, our heroine thought. In her childhood, her father came into Grace's room and said he was taking this item for safekeeping, even though her mother had specifically bequeathed this relic to her daughter. Catherine Allen also knew this perfectly well and promised Grace to return the item as soon as she got married. He just wanted to check something. The girl tried to resist, not wanting to have the last item from her deceased mother taken away from her. However, such behavior only angered her father, and he called it insolence. And then he began to scold the girl for behaving so brazenly towards adults at her age. Grace still couldn't believe that her father had actually done that. The Duchess gently took Lady Allen by the shoulders and asked worriedly if she was all right. She smiled, hoping to somehow rectify the situation, and suggested they return home. Soon they got into the carriage and set off. Selena handed the main character a box and asked Grace to accept it. Although the Duchess had bought this item herself, she now believed it should belong to Grace. Besides, the dream hen is not the only one in the world. If Selena wants, she can easily get another one. But this particular item is the only one for Grace. Her mother's relic will always remain priceless and irreplaceable. The main character was touched. She perfectly understood that the Duchess herself had been looking for this item for a long time. But suddenly, Selena declared that she wasn't giving it away for free. In return, the lady must promise to continue spending time with her. It was the least Grace could do, so she nodded and, with a warm smile on her face, pressed the gifted item to her chest. She was sincerely grateful to the Duchess for such generosity. Selena decided to ask Grace if she knew how to use a dream sensor, and the girl shook her head negatively. As it turned out, if you light a fire in it and place it at the head of your bed while you sleep, it shows the past and the future. And they also say it can show whatever a person wants to see. The main character was very surprised to learn about this. Could her mother's relics really possess such power? So, Father also knew about the properties of the dream sensor back then, and that's why he tried to take this item away. Could this man have sold Mother's inheritance for just a few coins? The heroine thought. Indignation appeared on Catherine Allen's face as soon as he heard the butler's words. He had already sent the money to the temple, but these arrogant people still decided to demand another 20,000 grangs. Thomas was uncomfortable talking about it, but it seems the young master touched the temple's property. It is rumored that he coveted the temple's holy water and, alas, desecrated it. This greatly enraged Catherine Olin, and he shouted, "Did this fool really find nothing better than to encroach upon a sacred place?" The temple is closely connected to the royal palace, so such an act could land one in the palace prison. For this very reason, the Marquis could not allow the heir to the family to fall into such trouble, so he ordered the full amount to be paid to the temple. But as it turned out, a demand was sent from the temple to immediately take the young master. Catherine Olin yelled that since these idiots took the money, they should now bear the responsibility. He asked the butler to tell them to take him, and Thomas bowed, promising to fulfill everything. Taking another drag of cigarette smoke, the Marquis suddenly asked when Grace was planning to return. Thomas said that Mrs. Black had sent a letter asking to allow the lady to stay longer at the ducal house. The Marquis only replied that women do nothing but gather and chat endlessly, and then dismissed Thomas. Catherine was completely convinced that the Black Mare was to blame for everything that happened. If it weren't for her, the head of the Allen family wouldn't have had to spend so much money. In principle, the Marquis doesn't necessarily have to resort to such expenditures of his own funds. He can simply sell it again and cover the costs. This time, the late Eleonora will help him. The Marquis opened the safe and immediately froze, not understanding what it was doing there. Cold sweat broke out on his forehead, and his lips barely whispered that this simply couldn't be. The man burns this letter to ashes with his own hands, but for some reason, it reappeared in the safe. Catherine Allen bit his fingers, wondering what this dead creature was trying to achieve. It was about Eleonora, the Marquise's ex-wife, who even after her own death gave Catherine no peace. The man remembered the day when this woman came into his office and declared that she wanted the Marquis to make a deal with her. This offer immediately interested Catherine. Eleonora only asked to give Grace all her belongings on the day her daughter came of age. She was ready to promise the Marquis 100,000 grangs for his signature on this contract. The Marquise perfectly understood that this was the only way she could make her husband fulfill his duty, because he loved money. Eleanor explained her decision by saying that she knew very well that the man was not going to leave anything to Grace. Therefore, at least her mother's belongings should be with her. Lately, doctors had been saying that the Marquise was terminally ill and almost blind, but the defiant look in this woman's eyes still hadn't faded. After the death of his first wife, Catherine Olin met her, the daughter of a foreign nobleman. She was too beautiful, so the Marquis used all his connections to make her his wife. Catherine thought that in marriage, this woman would become submissive, but her stubbornness could not be broken. In moments of physical abuse, Eleonora looked at her husband with her strangely shining eyes, as if challenging him. Everything about the Marquise began to annoy him. This also applied to the plebeian maids with whom she chatted cheerfully, and even the daughter whom Eleonora bore. The Marquise began to act as if her husband had become nothing to her, and constantly looked at him coldly. Catherine immediately considered Eleanor's offer ridiculous. How could this woman have 100,000 grangs? But she calmly explained that her cousin would prepare the money. The Marquis slammed his fist on the table and shouted that his wife was lying again. He was sure that handsome blonde was no cousin of hers. Would a cousin really pay 100,000 grangs for her? However, Eleonora did not consider this important, because Marquis Olin was ready to do anything for money. Therefore, the woman resolutely declared that she was ready to put 100,000 and her own life on the scales. She only gave the Marquis the right to one answer: to sign or to refuse. For some reason, at that moment, Catherine felt crushed by this sick and worthless woman, but he still agreed. And indeed, her cousin soon brought the promised 100,000. But the Marquis still considered it dirty money from a lover. Catherine immediately gambled it all away, though he hadn't even been interested in gambling before. The money quickly ran out, and his anger only grew. And then Eleonora simply died. At that moment, the Marquis wondered if this insolent fool really thought he would keep a promise to a dead woman. Now all the property will belong to him, not to that scoundrel or his daughter. First, Catherine, without hesitation, burned that contract. The late Marquise's belongings were sold for a very good price, and with all the money raised, Marquis Olin bought himself a seat in the Senate, confident that now this agreement was over. Only everything turned out not at all as the man had imagined. This cursed contract started appearing again and again, and it was beginning to seriously worry Catherine. Punching the agreement, the man yelled, "Does that wench really think I'll be scared?" Eleonora had been dead for a long time, and the dead can't do anything. So the Marquis tore up the contract once again, and then he quickly left his office, slamming the door loudly. As if by magic, all the scraps of paper came together as one. It was again written on it that the aforementioned belongings of Eleonora Laetitia would be transferred to Grace Olin, and failure to comply would result in punishment. Soon, the Duchess Black and Lady Olin returned to the duchy. The first thing they noticed was Sir Haim looking pale. Grace started to worry. The man looked as if he had eaten arugula leaves, but he assured her he was fine. And then he asked the ladies how their walk had been. The heroines told him how wonderfully they had spent time together, which made Haim very happy. He was glad that all his efforts had not been in vain, as he had to restrain the Duke, who wanted to follow the lady. Grace was very surprised, because usually men can't stand shopping. At that very moment, the Duke appeared in the front hall, which caused great surprise among all those present, because Lucas appeared before everyone in just a bathrobe, calling himself an unusual man. A smile appeared on his lips, and a question flew from them, asking if shopping had pleased the lady. And then Duke Black confessed that he had missed Grace very much. The young girl's cheeks immediately flushed. She had not expected to hear such a confession from the Duke. Meanwhile, as he descended the stairs, Lucas continued, saying that he had been very worried that Grace had not returned for so long. While waiting for the girl with such impatience, the Duke suddenly came to the conclusion that when you meet again after a long wait, the joy becomes stronger. But Grace couldn't look at Lucas, wishing someone would cover his exposed chest. Haim became a savior. He informed his Grace that no matter how happy he was, it was completely indecent to meet someone in such a state. Besides, the Duke should understand that there are other people present here. The Duchess stood smiling happily all this time. As soon as Lucas changed, he explained that he had been rude just now and had forgotten about his clothes in his haste. Then he asked his mother how the journey had been, and she only replied to Lucas that he was asking too quickly. The man confessed that without the two of them, the mansion seemed empty. He couldn't even express in words how much he had awaited their return. In any case, Lucas was curious to know if the lady enjoyed the journey with his mother. This woman is so energetic that even the Duke himself was afraid that Grace might find it difficult to be around her. With a heavy sigh, Selina said with a hint of sadness in her voice that when Lucas was little, he wasn't a child who spoke so rudely. Every night he would cling to the hem of her skirt and say he was scared. The main character was very surprised because this was nothing like the serious Duke Black. Lucas, with a strange smile, tensely said that he didn't remember anything like that, which made Selina laugh quietly. She felt sorry that her beloved son didn't remember anything, so the Duchess offered to tell Grace everything. The man pleaded not to do it, which made our heroine laugh. His reaction seemed amusing. Suddenly, a thought came to Grace that illuminated her. Lucas was taken aback when the young lady suddenly asked if his lordship liked cute things, and then she handed him a small figurine of a black pony as a gift. Grace explained that it was a good luck charm. She had bought it in a hurry and, unfortunately, hadn't had time to wrap it nicely. For some reason, this pony reminded her of the Duke. The man abruptly jumped up, asking if it was true. Such behavior greatly surprised our heroine. Lucas just couldn't believe that Grace thought of him, even though today wasn't a special day for giving gifts. In fact, the young girl was simply curious how the Duke would react if she suddenly gave him something. However, she couldn't admit such a thing out loud. Lucas politely asked his mother to leave them alone, and then, clearing his throat, addressed Grace again. Unexpectedly, he asked the young lady to go on a date with him tomorrow. Selina, who had not yet left the room, smiled, and the Duke, meanwhile, suggested to Grace that they discuss all the details tomorrow. Before leaving, the Duke said that Grace could ask for anything for tomorrow's date, but she replied that it was unnecessary. However, Lucas sincerely hoped that the lady would not refuse. And then the man headed for the exit, wishing Grace a good night as a final gesture. our heroine's heart began to beat faster. The young girl bowed her head and wished Lucas good night in return. The Duke turned around, and the main character noticed the joyful smile he gave her on his face. The next day, the man was perplexed. He didn't understand if it was truly unnecessary for him to carry it. He was glad that Grace seemed happy, but truthfully, the Duke wanted to give Lady Allen something more valuable than books. Lucas asked in bewilderment if Grace wasn't interested in shiny things, not understanding that our heroine couldn't accept such a thing. The girl replied that this was enough for her, that for her, truly valuable things were books. Grace said that there's even a saying in the world that books are excellent food for the mind. When she was little and wasn't allowed outside, Grace read books. Even without experience, she found a lot of knowledge and love in them. At such moments, the main character felt that she was embarking on a journey that she was not destined to take in this life. These stories always filled the little girl's heart. So now, Grace is really happy that she found such a good bookstore. Lucas accepted this answer and said that he had a place he wanted to go to himself and asked Grace to accompany him. The main character immediately agreed, because it wouldn't be right if only she was enjoying herself. So, a real date began. Our heroes went to the atelier. There, Grace tried on a very beautiful dress that highlighted all the beauty of her figure and appearance. After that, the heroes went to a flower shop, and of course, the Duke made several purchases for the girl there. As a result, the heroes visited countless stores they passed by. In the end, they decided to grab a bite at an establishment where Lucas asked the lady if she had enjoyed her day. Grace, laden with gifts from the Duke, awkwardly replied yes. Looking at the menu, the man thoughtfully said that they needed to try as many desserts as possible. While Lucas was placing the order, our heroine decided to say that no matter how much she thought about it, compared to her gift, she had received too much. Only one question lingered in the main character's mind. Wasn't this too much? The Duke firmly stated that if there were too many gifts, a servant would come later and load everything into the carriage, so the lady shouldn't trouble herself. In response, Grace said she had already received enough gifts, so there was no need to give her anything more. Although it was embarrassing, Lucas still asked if he couldn't just give a gift because he wanted to. Whenever the Duke made that face, our heroine always lost her words. The waiter brought our heroes dessert, the sight of which greatly surprised Lady Allen. There were clearly desserts for couples on the table. Grace immediately tried to rectify the situation, telling the waiter that they hadn't ordered that. But as it turned out, the establishment was currently running a promotion for couples, offering complimentary drinks and desserts. Our heroine was horrified and blushed terribly. She called the waiter over to explain that they weren't actually a couple, but Lucas stopped her. The Duke reminded the lady that they were quite seriously thinking about marriage, so they, as a decent bride and groom, should simply accept this gift. Formally, our heroine agreed with his words, but this turn of events still greatly embarrassed her. Lucas speared a small piece of dessert with his fork and brought it to Grace's lips, who was feeling terribly awkward right now. The waiter shouted that the couple was in their most romantic period, wished them a good evening, and disappeared. Grace couldn't understand if Lucas felt no shame at all, but seeing his satisfied smile, the heroine concluded that he did not. Gathering her courage, the main character swallowed a piece of cake from the fork Lucas offered her. A satisfied smile appeared on the Duke's face. He noticed that Grace now calmly handled sharp objects without much panic, and the girl replied that it was thanks to him. Grace suggested that the reason was that there was no cause for stress now, as she was living the most peaceful days of her life. Lucas admitted that he was still worried. It seemed to him that he wasn't taking good enough care of the girl. His hands trembled as soon as Grace asked what was going on. As a result, the Duke confessed that until now, he had been making excuses to refuse, but now it was time to tell Grace the truth. Marquis Allen asked the girl to return home. Just now, our heroine was feeling very well, but now, inside the main character, there was a feeling as if she had plunged headfirst into an abyss. The sun had long since disappeared behind the horizon, and dusk had fallen outside. Our heroes had only just returned home. Grace was only thinking about the Duke's words. She herself knew perfectly well that she couldn't stay here forever. The heroine fully expected her father to demand her return, because the Marquis was a rather hot-tempered man. He's clearly not calling her because he misses her. Finally, Grace thanked the Duke for escorting her to her room and added that it had been a great day. She knew she shouldn't frown like that, so she wished Lucas good night and went to her room. But the man quickly caught up with her and stopped her. He only wanted to say that if the lady doesn't want to return home, she can stay in this mansion for as long as she wishes. Grace started to worry. Lucas stopped the door as it was closing. What if it had caught his hand? The Duke announced that he would explain everything about the upcoming wedding to the Marquis himself. However, the main character refused because the girl believed it was something she had to deal with herself. She no longer wanted to hide. Lucas caught himself thinking that not so long ago, Grace had looked completely depressed, but now there was none of that in her eyes. The man admitted that he had hardly ever gotten angry since childhood. If Lucas were to lose self-control, the curse would turn him into a beast, which is why he had trained his restraint from a very young age. But when it came to Grace, our hero somehow couldn't manage it. The main character innocently asked what the Duke meant now. The man's hand gently touched the lady's chin. He languidly said that self-control had been a big problem lately, and then slowly reached for Grace's lips. The girl immediately turned away, as she was not yet ready for such a serious step in their relationship. She was taken aback when the man sharply pulled away and started laughing. Now the main character understood that Lucas had simply been teasing her all this time, so she began to complain childishly. Suddenly, the man said that they were now even, and Grace remembered the moment when she ran away, calling the Duke a liar. The girl couldn't even imagine that the Duke could be so persistent, to which he replied that Grace was simply too vindictive for her height. The main character jokingly declared that Duke Black had already annoyed her enough, so she started pushing him towards the door, telling him to go to sleep. She reminded the man that lately he had been staying up late dealing with affairs. Grace wanted to add something else, but suddenly froze as the Duke's warm lips touched her cheek. Pulling back, Lucas smirked and said that this was his last surprise. Our heroine was speechless, and her entire face began to burn with embarrassment. Before leaving, Duke Black said he very much hoped that the lady liked his last gift as well. Let's talk now about Jamie Demigras, the one and only assistant of the Black ducal house. This man possesses a pleasant appearance and talent. In other words, he's a man who has everything. However, that's only how it might seem at first glance. Because right now, standing before him is a man who has much more. Broad shoulders, expressive features, and monstrous stamina. Duke Black did 5 days' worth of work in 2. Noticing his adjutant staring intently at him, the Duke, with a self-satisfied smile, asked if he had something on his face. When Chaim stands next to the Duke, he immediately starts to feel like a squid. Deciding to dismiss that thought, the man reported that the Duke was in a surprisingly good mood today. Something might have happened to Grace, since Lucas's satisfied smile just won't leave his face. The Duke lied that he didn't understand what the assistant was talking about, but Chaim skeptically replied to the Duke that they had known each other for a long time, so Lucas can tell his older brother everything. The Duke only laughed at the 1-year age difference, but did not deny that he and Chaim were close, because it would be foolish to dispute this fact. A smile appeared on Chaim's face, because in reality, he and the Duke had been friends for 20 whole years. Since childhood, the future adjutant came to the Black family home with his mother, who served Lady Selena. So, friendship with the future Duke became quite natural. Chaim started spending a lot of time with Lucas, who was his age. Still, the Duke decided to share his worries that tomorrow, Grace would be returning to Olin Manor, and Lucas didn't want to let her go there, not even for a moment. Such words came as a surprise to Chaim. Could it be that Lucas Black, who had always been indifferent to women, was thinking about a fated love for the first time? Apparently, this man had fallen in love much more deeply than he himself thought. If the gentleman was so unwilling to let the girl go, the adjutant suggested trying something. Soon, Chaim was hit by reality. Sitting behind a pile of papers, the man couldn't understand why he ever got involved in that couple's relationship. He wasn't in a position to give advice himself, but now he had a huge amount of work. There was so much of it that it was useless even to think about dating, let alone marriage. Chaim threw the papers up and shouted, "Quote 0," while he was just trying to convince himself that he wasn't jealous. The man's head began to spin, so he decided to take a short break. To perk himself up, Chaim decided to have a cup of coffee, so he headed to the kitchen to ask the chef for one. As soon as the man crossed the threshold, a mug of aromatic coffee appeared right before his nose. It turned out to be Miss Julia, who somehow knew that Mr. Chaim had come for coffee. Feeling his heart beat faster, Lucas asked what Julia was doing here, and in response, the heroine asked if she wasn't allowed to be here. She said that the cook had promised to show her a special recipe for ginger cookies, so she came here. But while she was learning, everyone suddenly had things to do and left, so Julia decided to pass the time with a cup of coffee. Chaim noted that Miss Allen's personal maid had already fully settled in here. Gradually, this girl became like one of the family in this house. She is very smart and sociable and quickly finds common ground with everyone. However, Chaim noticed something strange. Every time his eyes meet Julia's, the young girl somehow becomes wary. More precisely, the hero began to feel as if she was watching him. Chaim began to hope that he hadn't stolen Julia's coffee, but the girl reassured him, saying that wasn't the case. The maid simply noticed that the adjutant always drank coffee at this time, so she had prepared this drink especially for him. But if Mr. Chaim suddenly wanted something else, Julia was determined to prepare it. The man smiled, saying that coffee was exactly what he needed right now. Chaim decided to ask if Julia had already packed everything for tomorrow's return, and she replied that she would do it right away. She was very surprised when Mr. Chaim followed her, arguing that he simply decided to help her. Even though the days here are so hectic that you barely have time to breathe, sometimes it doesn't even seem difficult. Chaim suggested that Julia change masters, which startled the girl, thinking that the man had decided to target the lady. The day came when Grace was to return to Marquis Oline's estate. She thanked them for their hospitality, and Chaim, with a smile, asked the girls to visit them again. The main character noticed that Lucas was not there, so she assumed he was too busy to see her off. The young girl was taken aback when the carriage door suddenly swung open. Appearing out of nowhere, Duke Black firmly stated that he could not allow the lady to leave alone. He got into the carriage and sat opposite Grace, declaring that as her fiancé, he must make a good impression on the girl's father. Grace discontentedly told Lucas that she couldn't just show up so suddenly without warning. In response, the Duke smiled radiantly, extended his pinky finger, and promised to be a good boy. As a result, the main character resigned herself and asked the man not to blame her if something unpleasant were to happen. Sitting in the flower garden, the Duchess, with anxiety in her heart, wondered if Lucas would be able to cope with this difficult task. The woman was surprised when he unexpectedly declared his desire to accompany Grace, but most of all, she was concerned about the girl's condition. At that very moment, Duchess Black watched as Grace, with an inscrutable expression, got into the elegant carriage. This emotionless face seemed to be forever imprinted in Selina's memory. It stubbornly refused to leave her thoughts, tormenting her soul with quiet anxiety. That is why the Duchess placed great hopes on Lucas, believing that he would be able to provide worthy support to the lady. Soon, a carriage drawn by black horses arrived at the Olin estate. Grace stepped out of the carriage and looked at her childhood home, as if evaluating it from a new, unfamiliar perspective. Once, this place had seemed cozy and familiar to her, but now it felt stifling and confining. After the luxurious life in the Black household, Grace felt this oppressive atmosphere particularly acutely. Now, this place reminded her not of a home, but of a gilded cage, depriving her of freedom and joy. Grace was pulled from her thoughts by Duke Black, who gently took her hand and softly called her name. The man asked her not to show her fear, and this question genuinely surprised the girl. Raising her eyebrows in confusion, she asked what made him say that, and Lucas, with a sly smile, suggested that he must have imagined it. For someone who always bravely faced any challenge, Grace now looked unusually hesitant and lost. "It's not indecision," she exclaimed. "It's just that memories flooded over me." As soon as Grace fell silent, Lucas, now without any mockery, asked if she felt better. Then the main character realized that the Duke was holding her hand, and even his teasing was just a way to calm her anxiety. The lady thanked Lucas, feeling her peace of mind return, to which he replied that it was his duty as a gentleman. The girl smiled, catching herself on a strange thought, because just recently she was even afraid to look up at this man, and now he seemed to her the most reliable and loyal ally, on whom she could rely in any situation. Lucas asked the lady to allow him to escort her to the end, and in response, Grace laughed, asking him to stop speaking in that tone. The butler led our heroes to Marquis Allen's study and reported that the master was already eagerly awaiting them. As soon as the door swung open, Catherine Allen flinched in surprise. He forced a smile, asking in surprise if the Duke himself had deigned to visit him, though he couldn't understand why Grace had brought him along. The Marquis asked them not to stand in the doorway, but rather to come in and take their seats. Catherine apologized for the humble reception, to which Lucas replied that he was the one who should apologize for his unexpected appearance. It was funny, because her father didn't even greet Grace properly, as if he didn't notice her presence. The Marquis carefully looked over the young man, noting that he was flaunting expensive jewelry and exquisite clothes. This arrogant boy is acting too conceited. Without Grace, he wouldn't be able to take a single step. Catherine smiled and suggested Grace greet her father, now that she had finally returned home, but the girl firmly refused. She confidently declared that she would stay at Black's house, which caused genuine shock to appear on the Marquis's face. The main character grabbed Lucas's hand to explain to her father the reason for her visit today, as they had decided to officially announce their upcoming engagement. Trying to suppress the anger bubbling inside him, Marquis Allen reproachfully asked his daughter if she realized what she was saying. Strolling around this man's house as if she were the mistress was far from the best idea for her future, he thought. The main character reminded her father that he himself had wished for her marriage to Lucas, and a visit to the groom's house should not cause shame. The Marquis merely replied dryly that the world was full of surprises, and many noble families saw Grace as a worthy bride. Among them was even one young lord madly in love with the girl, and the Marquis suggested she meet him. Lucas, with a friendly but tense smile on his face, said, as expected, Grace is charming to any man. But he was immensely happy that such a stunning girl had chosen him and no one else. He believed that tying his fate to Duke Black was far from the worst decision. Marquis Allen could not find a worthy answer, so he only cursed the situation in his mind. Besides the royal family, this is the most powerful and influential house in the entire country, possessing immense wealth. They owned millions of acres of land and picturesque islands, and their trade guilds were among the largest. The jewelry business especially flourished, thanks to the many mines under their patronage, but the problem was elsewhere. Namely, with this arrogant and self-assured guy standing in front of him. He could fool around and smile, but deep down he would always care only about Grace, and wouldn't give the Marquis a single coin. Catherine hated this smug, handsome man the most, and he would have preferred Grace to marry anyone else. The Marquis impatiently announced that it would be better for the Duke to return today, and Grace should stay here. The main character intended to object, but at that very moment, Lucas asked for just a minute of her time. The Marquis turned and looked suspiciously at the Duke, trying to understand what he was up to this time. Lucas announced that before the gentleman left, he had an important proposal that needed to be discussed. Therefore, he politely asked the Marquis for permission to spare him some time to present his request. Such an unexpected statement plunged Grace into deep shock, because Lucas had never said anything like that to her before. The man offered his sincere apologies and promised Grace that he would not allow any harm to come to her. Therefore, he asked her to trust him for a moment and simply observe the unfolding events without interruption. The main character, after some hesitation, agreed, and Marquis Olean, intrigued, sat back down in his chair. He became unbearably curious to know what the Duke was going to propose, what hidden condition lay behind this gesture. Before speaking, Lucas slowly reached into the inner pocket of his elegant frock coat. He took out a folded sheet of paper and placed it on the table, explaining that it might be quicker and clearer if he showed it. The Marquis abruptly jumped up from his seat, his face contorted with astonishment and disbelief. The main character's eyes widened in surprise as her father exclaimed, disbelieving his eyes, quote, "Zero. The most popular and valuable gemstone in Geronium is undoubtedly the sparkling diamond. It is the Brew mine that is known for its richest deposits of these rare and precious stones." Grace anxiously hoped that Lucas was not about to transfer ownership of this place to her father right now. But, just by looking at the man's expression, the main character realized that he truly intended to do so. All that was left was to wonder what Lucas was thinking. Could he have planned this visit with such a purpose from the very beginning? In that case, our heroine had no choice but to watch from the sidelines to see what would come of it. The Duke's offer was incredibly tempting. Even if the Marquis sold all his lands, it wouldn't be enough to buy the Brew mine. Lucas, in a calm and confident tone, stated that he only had two things he would like in return. First, the man wished for the Marquis to allow Grace to choose her future husband herself, without any pressure from anyone. And second, whatever the girl's decision, the Duke did not want the Marquis to interfere in her personal life in any way. If Catherine Olin promised to observe these two simple conditions, Lucas would transfer this document for the mine to him after Grace's wedding. The Marquis decided to clarify whether these conditions would still apply if Grace did not end up marrying the Duke. Catherine Olin believed that this woman could not be trusted. Her words might be a lie. Taking the Marquis's words into account, Lucas firmly stated that he was quite confident he could win Grace's heart. Therefore, he asked Grace to give him a chance, to allow him to prove his feelings. Even if the girl eventually married someone else, Lucas knew he would respect her decision and wish her happiness. These words, like an echo, resounded in Grace's thoughts, making her wonder about his true intentions. This offer was clearly unprofitable for the Duke, so the Marquis considered it quite absurd and illogical. However, despite all his doubts, Catherine Olin decided to accept it, and the men shook hands firmly. After that, our heroes left the office of the head of the Olin family, leaving behind a tense atmosphere and unspoken questions. Lucas cast a worried glance at Grace and said that he was very glad they were able to return to the Duchy of Black together. But the girl only dryly asked the hero why he had made this strange and inexplicable deal. Why the Duke decided to go so far, offering the rights to the Brew mine, and why he made such an unreasonable and risky offer to the Marquis. After all, only Lucas himself would suffer significant financial and reputational damage from this decision. The main character was convinced that there were no reasonable grounds to give away such a valuable mine for someone like her. Lucas confessed that he just wanted to help her and ease her situation, make her life a little better. Although the man believed that he had done an excellent job and his plan had worked flawlessly. In addition, it will take some time for the Marquis to reach the Brew mine and start diamond mining. This means that whenever the Marquis visits the mine, Grace will have free time to do her own thing. Lucas secretly told her that the diamond reserves in the Brew mine were actually dwindling each year, so it had about 2 years left. Lucas's sincere tone and his serious, focused face inexplicably began to frighten Grace, causing anxiety in her heart. Suddenly, the protagonist heard a familiar, affectionate voice and shifted her attention to the approaching figure. A smiling Elia ran towards her, apologizing to the lady for her lateness as she moved, explaining that she had been instructing the other servants. The main character impulsively hugged her headmaid, as if afraid that she would disappear from her life again. She confessed that she had missed her very much, and the smile on Elia's face became even warmer and more radiant. The woman replied that she too had greatly missed her miss, her kindness and tenderness. Suddenly, the headmaid realized that she had just allowed herself to behave indecently in front of the Duke himself. In response, Lucas merely said softly that everything was fine and there was no need to worry at all, reassuring her with a restrained smile. Rather, it would be a shame if Grace simply returned home, so the Duke suggested having a cup of fragrant tea before leaving. Of course, in the meantime, he would arrange for the carriage to be prepared, and Julia would gather all the necessary items for the journey. Now Elia perfectly understood why the Miss decided to return to the Duchy of Black, and her heart filled with hope. All this time, our heroine was bothered by one disturbing fact that gave her no peace. Since they last saw each other, the head maid had become even thinner and paler, as if someone was draining her from the inside. Elia had always been by her side since childhood, supporting and protecting her from all misfortunes. The girl wanted to say something, to express her concern, but the head maid interrupted her, asking if the lady was enjoying her life in the Duchy of Black. Grace answered in the affirmative, and this brought genuine joy to Elia, because now she no longer had to worry about her well-being. Now Miss Olin can return, because the Duke is surely already exhausted from the agonizing wait for her return. Elia escorted the lady to the carriage and, with a plea in her voice, asked the Duke to take good care of her, protecting her from all troubles. Then the experienced coachman pulled on the reins, and the carriage, swaying gently, set off, carrying Grace to the Duchy of Black. The head maid, with a strained, sad smile on her face, watched her for a long time until the carriage disappeared around the bend. And so, after all these short but significant conversations, our heroine finally returned to the Duchy of Black. Meanwhile, a long-awaited letter, sealed with an exquisite seal, arrived at Lucas's estate. It turned out to be an invitation to a meeting next week in a luxurious orangery from Marianne Gastaccio, a well-known socialite. The lady, however, wished for Miss Grace to join them as well, which made Selina Black wonder what she should do now. A deep, moonless night had fallen, and everyone around had long since fallen into a peaceful sleep. But Grace couldn't sleep. She constantly heard her mother's quiet, regretful voice, tirelessly apologizing to her for something. Eleonora clearly wanted to say something else, to share a secret, but her words were lost in an unclear whisper that Grace couldn't make out. And as soon as the young girl tried to answer something, to express her pain, she realized with horror that she had lost her voice. Eleonora cried bitterly and repeated that she needed to finish some important business to fulfill a promise. Since Grace couldn't speak aloud, she mentally told her mother that because of her, she had never had a hard time, and she didn't need to be sad. The woman, as if hearing her silent words, smiled faintly, and her face brightened. She asked her dear Grace to live as she was now, to be strong and kind, because Mommy loves her very much with all her heart. The main character slowly opened her tear-filled eyes and realized that the bright morning sun was already shining outside the window. She sat up from the bed, feeling a heaviness in her head, and clutched her temples with her hands. A dream about her mother, so vivid and painful, hadn't visited our heroine in a long time, tormenting her with memories. Noticing the dream catcher on the nightstand, the main character realized it was all because of the incense she had lit the night before. She hugged the item tightly, as if pressing a piece of her mother's love to herself, and whispered that she loved her very much too. A whole week, filled with quiet anticipation, had passed since Grace returned to the luxurious Black mansion. The maid, Julia, opened the door, and with an apologetic tone, informed the Duke and Duchess about the long wait. And then Grace entered, dressed in a beautiful gown adorned with delicate bows and silk ribbons. A tea party at Countess Gastaccio's luxurious orangery was ahead, so it was necessary to prepare properly for this important event. Selina was delighted with Grace's outfit, which Duke Lucas had personally chosen, highlighting her beauty and grace. The young woman decided to ask the man what he thought of the dress and her overall look. She hoped that Lucas also thought that this outfit suited her very well and that she looked charming in it. The man smiled warmly, his eyes shining, and replied that in this outfit, Grace looked even more beautiful and unique. The heroes sharply pulled away from each other as soon as Duchess Black exclaimed that they had noticeably grown closer lately. And yet, Selina was grateful to the lady for agreeing to go with her to this social tea party, supporting her in a difficult moment. The main character admitted that she was just a little unaccustomed, as something like this was happening for the first time, but she was still looking forward to it. Grace felt calm and peaceful, and on the contrary, was grateful for such an opportunity to meet new people. Selina impulsively hugged the young girl and called her very sweet and charming, expressing her sincere sympathy. And then the Duchess turned her puzzled gaze to her son and asked what he was doing watching them. Lucas stood with outstretched arms, as if he was about to embrace Grace, expressing his feelings. He pretended that nothing had happened, and Selina stated that Grace didn't need to worry and fret so much. This is a light social gathering. There's nothing in it that could scare or upset her. But in reality, Selina confessed that she was afraid of this meeting, fearing awkward situations and unpleasant conversations. Now Grace began to truly worry about what kind of orange club this was, that even Lady Selina was anxious. The Duchess decided that, to begin with, Miss Allen needed to get acquainted with the members of this exclusive society. It's better to find out in advance who will be there and prepare for possible questions and discussions. The hostess, Countess Gastaccio, adores rare plants and exciting travels, and her mansion has a wonderful glass conservatory. Although there haven't been any official announcements yet, since the Countess mentioned Grace in the invitation, she must already consider her Lucas's fiancé. Usually, our heroine paid no attention to empty newspaper gossip, preferring the real world instead. But now, everything had changed, and every piece of news seemed like an ominous premonition. Any mistake Grace made could tarnish the impeccable reputation of Lady Selena and Lucas, forcing the girl to be extremely careful. Suddenly, amidst the ordinary, something unusual and alarming caught young Grace's attention. Among the valuable information received from the Duchess Black, there was a curious article about a mysterious person. The next day, the black horses were already harnessed to the carriage, ready for a long and dangerous journey. Lucas was sorry he couldn't share this adventure with the ladies, as the tea party was exclusively for the fair sex. If he were even a little shorter, he might have even risked wearing a delicate women's dress. It seems our heroine has already grown accustomed to Lucas's eccentric exaggerations and unpredictable reactions. The man froze like a statue when Grace gently touched his chin, offering warmth and hope. With a warm, encouraging smile, she promised to return soon, so Lucas wouldn't have to languish alone. Completely unaware of the significance of her actions, Grace thought that now Lucas would be able to find long-awaited peace. Soon, the heroines arrived at Countess Castasio's luxurious mansion, nestled in lush gardens. They were immediately greeted by a courteous butler who led them through long corridors to the venue of the social event. The conservatory tea party at Countess Castasio's is an exquisite ladies' society where women enjoy tea and converse about life. At least, that's what Grace was told, and at that moment, Selena once again thanked the girl for agreeing to accompany her. The main character became anxious again, observing Duchess Black's excessive reaction, as if she was hiding something. Grace was about to object, but Selena interrupted her, reassuring her that only pleasant and benevolent people had gathered here. So she promised to thank each lady individually once they returned to their family mansion. While the main character began to panic more and more, the butler gallantly knocked on the crystal door of the conservatory and then politely informed his mistress of the arrival of Duchess Black and Lady Grace Allen, as if introducing two important personages. Grace turned a bewildered gaze to Selena, hearing her begin to whisper softly, addressing higher powers. It turned out to be a prayer, and the woman, with her hands outstretched, was asking God for a successful outcome of this visit. At that very moment, the door suddenly swung open, and a whole string of joyful and curious ladies appeared in the doorway. They immediately surrounded our heroines, like a swarm of bright butterflies drawn to the light. Grace was examined from all sides, admiring her magical eyes and the natural shine of her hair. And then the ladies in chorus solemnly declared that Lady Grace could now proudly join their exclusive club. Countess Mariana gratefully thanked everyone present for accepting her warm invitation to this exquisite tea party. She was truly eager to meet such a refined and mysterious young lady as Lady Grace, so she never gave up hope and pestered Lady Selena with requests. Countess Penelope Domer and Baroness Riley Lachetta enthusiastically supported her words, radiating genuine joy. All the ladies were incredibly happy for the opportunity to meet the charming Lady Allen, about whom the most flattering rumors circulated. This greatly surprised our heroine and made her ponder the hidden motives behind such fervent attention. Zeronium has long been a country where everything revolves around strong masculine principles and age-old traditions. Titles and lands are passed down exclusively through the male line to firstborn sons, and most believe that after marriage, a woman should completely submit to her husband. Lately, thanks to the progressive views of the Crown Prince, the younger generation of the aristocracy has started to see the world differently. But still, Grace didn't expect these ladies to be so welcoming and open, as if they had known her all their lives. Suddenly, Countess Castachio, deep in thought, remembered something, as if it had just dawned on her. Currently, rumors about the engagement of Duke Lucas Black and Lady Grace Allen are being discussed everywhere in society, so she wanted to know if it was true. Selena, with a slight smile, confirmed the news, adding that they had only recently begun officially discussing the details of the upcoming wedding. Suddenly, one of the aristocrats at the table, with a sarcastic smile, said that it was truly wonderful news, but with a hint of sarcasm. But she added that the choice of place and time for announcing the engagement seemed somewhat unfortunate and inappropriate to her. The main character involuntarily flinched and turned her gaze to this woman, feeling an unkind stare upon herself. For some reason, she was staring at her intently, and her gaze revealed undisguised hatred and disgust, as if Grace had done something terrible. Selena whispered that it was Countess Roxanne Rosenheim, and now our heroine understood everything, realizing the reason for the hostility. At that very moment, another person entered the conservatory, saying that the Duchess and Lady Alin must be terribly awkward and lonely right now. It turned out to be Alendia, along with her younger sister Asha, radiating calmness and elegance. The girl said that Asha got tired quickly today, so they decided to return, and Grace realized that her assumptions were correct. 3 years ago, it was Alendia who conducted difficult and lengthy marriage negotiations with Duke Lucas, hoping to become his wife. Lady Rosenheim offered her sincere apologies for her mother's inappropriate behavior towards Duchess Selena and Lady Grace Allen. Selena replied that everything was fine and reminded the ladies that this was Grace's first time attending such an event and they should be gentler with her. Suddenly, Countess Roxanne jumped up and screamed loudly, calling everyone present cruel and asking how they could treat her like that. Alendia quickly intervened, wanting to calm her impulsive mother and prevent a scandal. Countess Mariana, with a polite smile, suggested simply taking a breath and cooling down a bit, as they could discuss everything later. Grace caught herself thinking that such an outcome was to be expected, sensing the approaching storm. Even if the engagement was broken off quietly and without much fuss, they still had official negotiations, which could not have passed without a trace. For Countess Rosenheim, Grace's mere presence here is already difficult, but to see the Duke's fiancé before her is even more horrifying and unbearable. Countess Roxanne said that 2 long years had passed since she was last at such social gatherings, and Selena, it seemed, deliberately chose a place far away from her, as if avoiding awkward encounters and unpleasant conversations. Besides, she now acts as if she's nothing to her, as if an insurmountable chasm has opened between them. Suddenly, Countess Roxanne burst into loud tears and screamed, accusing Selena of excessive cruelty and injustice. Grace even froze in sudden bewilderment, as if she had been doused with ice water, rendering her speechless. The main character couldn't understand if she, through her own carelessness, had ruined everything and caused this scandal. Suddenly, Lady Alendia, radiating calmness and benevolence, approached our heroine and greeted her warmly. She suggested to Lady Allen that they go to the quiet garden and talk privately, away from curious glances and annoying gossip. Once alone, Alendia sincerely admitted that she had noticed how frightened the lady had been earlier, sensing her anxiety. She said that her mother genuinely adored Lady Selena, admiring her intelligence and beauty. They had been close friends for many years, sharing joys and sorrows, secrets and dreams with each other. Even in her youth, Lady Selena shone with her talents in history, poetry, music, and foreign languages, not to mention archery and horse riding. And Mother always admired her, Alendia recounted, seeing in her an example of femininity and intellect. She was sure that Lady Allen had certainly heard about her marriage negotiations with Duke Lucas, which were being discussed in high society. The main character did not hide it, and honestly told the truth, not wishing to conceal her knowledge. Suddenly, Alendia revealed that it was actually her mother's initiative. She wanted to get closer to Lady Selena, to strengthen their friendship. From the very beginning, neither the Duke nor the girl herself showed much interest in each other, so the engagement quickly and painlessly broke off. Alendia winked at Grace, saying with a sly smile that it was even better this way, because everyone should be with the one they love. Unfortunately, because of all this, an awkward distance arose between the girl's mother and Lady Selena, as if a wall had formed between them. Today's meeting was arranged for the first time in 2 years to try and mend things, to restore the former warmth and trust. Grace was very surprised that the lady decided to tell her about it, and Alendia realized that she had gotten too carried away with chatter, revealing personal secrets. She tried to explain that she just wanted the lady to know that her mother held no ill will towards Lady Allen, genuinely wishing her happiness. The main character looked at the girl with delight, realizing that she had just tried to comfort her, to support her in a difficult moment. Alendia felt awkward, realizing she had talked too much, and suggested Miss Allen look at the beautiful flowers in the garden. The girl said that she hadn't been here for a long time, and now there were so many new and rare plants, striking in their beauty. The lady reached out her hand to a delicate bud, intending to pluck it to adorn her hair. The main character rushed from her spot, shouting a warning for the lady not to touch him, fearing for her health. But suddenly, she tripped over a small stone hidden in the grass, losing her balance. Lady Alendia was taken aback when Lady Alin suddenly pressed her against the wall, trying to keep her from falling. The heroine began to protest and asked Grace not to rush at her so abruptly anymore, fearing injury. The main character began to apologize, explaining that this flower was very poisonous, so the girl could have been burned or even poisoned. However, Grace was now genuinely happy, sighing with relief, realizing that everything was fine, because Lady Alendia was perfectly fine and had not been harmed by the poisonous touch. Alendia blushed deeply, not understanding how Lady Grace could smile like that when she herself had almost been hurt. Just in case, she decided to check if Miss Allen was all right, showing genuine care and attention. The girl was worried that Grace might have gotten a bruise, as she had stumbled and almost fallen to the ground. The main character just smiled and called Lady Alendia an attentive and wonderful older sister, appreciating her kindness. Suddenly, the young girls noticed someone's unseen presence, feeling a foreign gaze upon them. Both tensed up and cast a frightened gaze downwards, trying to understand what was happening around them. And then they heard a strange sound that made them tense up even more, sensing something was wrong. The other ladies at the table heard the same thing, interrupting their social conversations and falling silent in anticipation. Countess Mariana, without losing her composure, quickly took the situation into her capable hands, demonstrating leadership qualities. She immediately called her loyal maid Titi, giving her a clear order, and then she ordered all the servants to be gathered immediately and to come to the orangery at once to resolve the situation. Selina began to feel uneasy, so she decided to clarify if something was really wrong, if something had happened. Marianne awkwardly admitted that they had been keeping exotic birds there for some time, hoping to please the guests. Countess Roxanne, with some bewilderment, said that they are indeed sometimes kept in conservatories, but she didn't understand why that was necessary. Mariana began to feverishly think about how she could properly explain everything to avoid misunderstandings and a scandal. She explained that these were exotic birds, very sensitive and timid, who do not warm up to people. The woman tried to approach them, but they didn't make any contact at all, showing wild fear and distrust. And probably because of the long and exhausting journey, they became aggressive, so it was decided to leave them in the conservatory. But of course, the servants tried their best and made a spacious cage for them in the most secluded corner of the conservatory. However, the problem lay in something else, in an unexpected and dangerous detail. The birds turned out to be so furious that the cage had to be covered with cloth to calm them down, but if you touch it even slightly, it might open. Selina and Roxana simultaneously screamed, expressing their indignation at how such an important and dangerous fact could have been withheld. Mariana tried to smooth things over, calming everyone by saying that if these creatures weren't provoked, everything should be fine. However, the piercing sound that once again echoed was definitely coming from the conservatory, confirming their fears. Selina started to worry even more, because Grace has acmophobia, and if a bird with sharp claws attacked her, something terrible could happen. So, without a second's hesitation, Duchess Black rushed to help, ignoring Roxana's plea to stop. She couldn't delay for a minute, otherwise it would be too late, and Grace might get hurt. For this reason, Countess Rosenheim decided not to stand still either, not wanting to remain on the sidelines of what was happening. She ran with her old friend, saying that she was not alone in worrying about the children, about their safety. Her action greatly surprised Selina, making her reconsider her attitude towards Roxana. The other ladies also decided to follow them, overcome with excitement and a desire to help. Both frightened women ran into the part of the conservatory where the girls were now. Alendia shifted her surprised gaze to her mother, not understanding the reason for her sudden anxiety. The woman rushed to her daughter and began asking if everything was all right, expressing genuine concern. The lady tried to explain that she was fine. She had just accidentally stumbled, startled by a sudden sound. Then the other ladies ran over, and Countess Mariana immediately offered her sincere apologies for not having told them everything sooner. Selina began looking around, trying to find Lady Allen, fearing for her safety. Suddenly, our heroine spoke up, so the Duchess would understand exactly where she should look, easing her worry. Selina asked worriedly if everything was all right, and Grace replied that she was fine, reassuring her. However, what happened to her made everyone present gape in astonishment, amazed by what they saw. These wild, exotic birds sat peacefully on the young girl's shoulders, as if tamed. Grace said that they flew up to her themselves and now don't leave her side at all, showing unusual trust. Alendia said that they most likely accidentally touched the cage and the door opened, letting the birds free. Initially, these creatures looked as if they were about to attack, displaying aggression and anxiety. But as soon as Grace uttered a few kind words, they immediately stopped, as if enchanted by her voice. Now Selena began to feel silly for having worried so much, raising an alarm for nothing. Countess Mariana even cried tears of joy because the birds looked so cute and defenseless when they were calm. At this, the commotion in the glass conservatory gradually died down. The servants arrived just in time to tidy up. Towards evening, all the guests decided to go home, tired from the emotions and impressions they had experienced. Selena informed Grace that they would also be leaving soon, as the ordered carriage was about to arrive at the mansion. At that very moment, the Rosenheim family ran up to them, and Alendia asked Grace for a moment, wishing to speak privately. Of course, the main character did not refuse, appreciating her sincerity and kindness. Alendia extended her hand and confessed that she was very pleased to meet Miss Allen today and hoped to meet again. Of course, this will be possible if Lady Allen doesn't mind, and they can continue their communication. The main character grabbed the girl's hand, thinking about how amazing and sincere she truly was, and then, with a warm smile, she said that she would be happy to see her anytime, ready for new meetings. Alendia smiled broadly in response and promised to eagerly await that moment, anticipating pleasant conversations. Then the carriage with the Rosenheim family also set off, carrying with them bright memories of the tea party. Selena turned to Grace and asked an unexpected question, curiously asking if anything like this had ever happened to her before. The main character pondered the Duchess's words. If you think about it, ever since early childhood, birds would often flock and land right on Grace's head. Our heroine then thought they were mistaking her head for a nest and cried a lot. And her mother always laughed when she saw it, which made the little girl cry even harder. Now, remembering it, Grace could admit that it probably looked funny from the outside. Finally, another carriage pulled up to the mansion, and our heroines thought it was for them. However, the color of the carriage indicated that it belonged to a completely different family. An elderly woman stepped out of it and gave Grace a scrutinizing look. The butler addressed her as Madame Cachenou, saying that the elder lady was already expecting her. The main character noticed that this woman looked at her again. Suddenly, Mrs. Cachenou started rushing towards our heroine at a furious speed. Grace couldn't understand what to do. Even saying hello to her felt awkward. As soon as the madam said that the lady had grown a lot, our heroine, confused, asked if they knew each other. The woman said that they had met a very long time ago, when Grace was still too young to remember. Since this madam knew her as a child, the main character realized that she might be familiar with her mother. As soon as the butler repeated that the elder lady was waiting, Madame Cachenou apologized, offering to talk another time. And then the woman left, saying in parting that they would see each other again soon. Selena noticed the Black family's carriage and joyfully announced that now they too could return. Norman fell onto the stone slab, painfully hitting his tailbone. He shifted his gaze to his assailant and called him a bastard. The commander of the Knights of the Lowen Ganache Temple declared that he didn't care who the boy was, because before God, all are equal. Norman started to complain even more. Does the temple really treat patients like this? The knight replied that the treatment had been finished a long time ago, and besides, the gentleman had defiled the holy water. It takes about 10 years to collect holy water for one mountain. Zerodium is strangely vulnerable to epidemics and natural disasters. When the dry season began, it was especially severe. That's why people rely on the temple, because human strength can't do anything here. Besides, Mr. Allen doesn't understand what he's done, so Lowen wasn't going to answer him anymore. Turning around, he wished the gentleman all the best. While Norman continued to grumble, a coachman appeared nearby and timidly asked if he should take the gentleman to the mansion. Now the young man's anger shifted to the poor servant, because he thought the coachman considered him a slacker. Everyone around only angered Norman with their attitude towards him. Suddenly, another carriage stopped near the temple. It bore a coat of arms with a silver wolf. As it turned out, it belongs to the Onia family, who rarely come to the capital but enjoy the royal family's trust. They say that the current head of the family is a woman. Norman found it amusing just thinking about a girl being put in charge of the family. However, their eyes suddenly met. Norman's face immediately turned red and he felt his heart start to beat faster. Meanwhile, a family dinner was taking place at the Black family mansion. The main character repeatedly replayed the woman's words in her head about how they would soon meet. Grace had a feeling that something strange was happening around her. To be more precise, it's not just a feeling. Even as a child, animals loved the girl, but what happened in the orangery was a little strange. Selena's reaction was also strange, so Grace began to wonder if it was all the influence of the curse. Lucas said that he couldn't say anything about the curse before the wedding because there was a taboo. So now our heroine will have to live with this feeling of anxiety until the wedding. The chance of the curse being lifted before the wedding seemed low, but the girl couldn't just sit and wait. She looked at Lucas and wondered if he even cared. The man didn't know why, but he was very happy that Grace looked his way. Our heroine was weak before this man's smile, and not only his. Lady Selena is the same. It's hard for both of them to talk about the curse, but strangely, they don't seem to be afraid of the curse itself. Is it possible that if you live with a curse for 700 years, you start to take everything calmly? The Duke and Duchess noticed Grace's strange reaction and began to think that the girl was unwell, but the heroine assured them that she was fine. In the end, if the heroine wants to know the truth about the curse, she has only one option left, so she decided to ask Lucas. It was about a taboo that forbids speaking about the curse.